Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Became JackRabbit the Vigilante? Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku woke up. He had the distinct feeling that wasn't meant to happen again. He was laying on grimy cement, for one. There was a dumpster to his right, brick walls on either side of him. Somewhere straight ahead was a road. Headlights passed by every few seconds with the rumble of car engines. He also felt like he had been hit by a bus. And like someone had taken a hammer to his head. Repeatedly. Even his vision was funny, like he was looking through green-tinted glass. Where was he? Izuku grasped for the reason, for the memory of how he had ended up here, and came up empty. There was just nothing. Only blank space. His name was Izuku Midoriya, and that was it. The only thing that remained. Not where he was, not even who he was, just his name and a handful of vague feelings gnawing at the inside of his pounding skull. One of those feelings told him to get up, to move. Izuku couldn't stay here. Something told him that had to run, because he wasn't meant to be here. He wasn't meant to wake up again. The fact that he did meant he had to get away. Quickly. So he pushed up on shaky arms, hazily registering the gloves on his hands and the long sleeves over his arms. Sitting up now, he could see they were a dusty, dark green, his pants a similar color. Dragging his feet under himself was hard, painful and shaky, but also just tough. A glance down showed that his shoes? His feet? No, those couldn't be his actual feet, because they were shaped like extended hair feet. He could feel that they were almost like jumping stilts, his actual foot not touching the ground as he levered to his feet, unsteady. Balancing was remarkably easy actually. It only took a few moments to get used to. Almost like he already knew how to, something ingrained in his bone and muscle while his brain had forgotten. Izuku wanted to question why. He needed to know why this felt familiar, even as he stumbled towards the mouth of the alley. One hand stayed braced on the brick as he walked. It was easier to move with every step, but something still dragged at his bones. Probably the angry headache drilling into his skull right now. There were a few people scattered up and down the dark street. The streetlights were on, but there was a sliver of blue still remaining on the horizon. Sometime just past sunset then. But what city was he in? Why couldn't he remember? Something prickled down Izuku's spine. An awareness, like something was coming. He stood up straighter, pushing off the wall. Something went screaming past him. The size of a large car and flying down the sidewalk, it screeched as it barreled past. People screaming followed it. Izuku watched as it lunged and grabbed a random person. His feet were moving before he could think. He stumbled, tripped, and got his feet under himself again. Running was a challenge, but some part of him already knew how to do this. His gait adjusted without conscious thought. People were screaming and he had to do something. Izuku launched himself at the thing, no idea of what he was doing or what he even could do, but knowing he had to try. Closer now, he realized the thing wasn't really human. There was no intelligence in its eyes. No intention in how it moved. Its features were drawn and pulled thin, like its bones were threatening to break through. Yet it still hardly moved when Izuku rammed into its shoulder first. It dropped the person it was holding, at least. Izuku could be thankful for that. Even if its attention did immediate shift to him with the creepiest roll of eyes known to man. God, he hated all for one. Izuku stopped. He pulled up short at the random bit of thought. Who was all for one? He desperately tried to dredge up a memory, any memory from the mud that had become his mind. There wasn't much, but something. Hazy and indistinct. He hated all for one. The feeling seemed to physically burn in his chest. It snagged into the meat along his ribs and pulled tight, rattling like a snake. There was no questioning it. The name made something flare in his soul, bright and burning. A desire for revenge, maybe? Or was it justice? A thin line. One Izuku didn't have the time to lay down, because he was suddenly being flung clear across the road and into a wall. Really? He groaned, peeling himself from the small crater he'd created. I haven't even been awake 5 minutes yet. The thing had no response, of course. Somehow that wasn't a surprise. Somehow, he knew these things couldn't talk. Now if his brain could just work and tell him why, then that would be great. Izuku didn't get an answer. Not from his brain and not from the thing. Instead he was snatched up like a doll and thrown again. He didn't hit a wall this time, at least. Instead Izuku hit the ground rolling. Hopping back to his feet wasn't that hard, even if he did stumble for a moment on the longer legs. But he got back up and saw the thing barreling towards him again. There was no time to think. Izuku crouched, braced himself, and jumped. He wasn't consciously prepared for just how high he leapt though. Clear over the monster attacking him and then some. He may have flailed slightly midair. In Izuku's defense, he hadn't expected the ground to suddenly be over 10 feet away because of his own jump. As it rapidly got closer again, he really hoped he also knew how to land. Kind of did? He landed. And then took a few running steps to try and not fall on his face, like when a kid flings themselves off a swing. A good thing he did too, because he felt something whistle by his back. A clawed hand if he had to guess. Izuku's next few steps were far more intentional. He glanced back and saw the thing way too close for comfort. A gaping mouth with sallow skin and 2 sharp teeth. Hollow eyes that still stared at Izuku, but there was nothing in them. Another flare of hatred washed through his chest. Izuku gritted his teeth and changed tactics. This time he swung around, ducking low as he dodged around the thing. Just a bit of room. The thing whipped around faster than Izuku expected it to. In a split second he was sent flying again. His ribs hurt, even before he slammed into more cement. Even before he rolled back to his feet with a mysterious ease. He just needed a second to think. Just a moment. The thing was fast, way too strong, and Izuku had no way of knowing what quirks it had. He needed some sort of plan. He needed time. He got his wish. Unfortunately, it came in the form of the creature finding another person to swipe at and try to throw. Izuku took a running leap, then launched himself. Without much thought he cleared the entire street. He arrowed through the air and landed feet first on the nomu's arm, making the entire thing bow and dip. Something felt like it cracked under his feet. But it stopped trying to grab another person. Instead it tried to grab Izuku, and then shrieked when he, in a panic, leapt straight up and off the arm and went airborne once again. Something definitely cracked under his feet that time. He also went up higher than before, practically level with some of the surrounding rooftops. What the F dash? How was he supposed to land? The nomu made a decent landing pad the first time, if it just didn't move. Izuku looked down. A bad decision usually went up so high, but in this case it let him see what he was landing on. And hopefully avoid breaking his legs. He hadn't yet though, so his odds were decent that whatever his shoe things were, they had a good amount of shock absorption. Had he made them himself? Had someone else made them for him? Why did he have these? So many questions, so little time as he went plummeting back to Earth. Except the nomu was watching him. It didn't even seem to register that its arm was probably broken, because it reached up to snatch him from the air. Izuku couldn't redirect quick enough. A massive fist closed around his neck. Izuku's immediate response was to try and kick at the massive arm. The thing hardly budged at his swinging kicks though, staring at him with blank, unblinking eyes, as its hand tightened around Izuku's throat. No, he could die here. He had only just woken up. He had no idea where here even was. He dug his fingers into the hand wrapped around him. There were small claws on his gloves, he dug those in too. He scratched and pulled and tried. He tried with all he had. But it didn't budge. The vice didn't move. Panic began to well up in his lungs. Under it, though, was something else. Something instinctive that told him to reach out and pull. He had nothing else to lose. Izuku snarled and reached with his hands, clawing at the arm and wrist of the monster, which didn't flinch. In his panic he followed instinct. Something in him lurched. His hand sparked. The nomu made a noise. Halfway between a groan and a spoon had gotten caught in a garbage disposal. It still didn't move, but it was something. Izuku took the feeling that had caught it and yanked. Green lightning flashed into existence over his hands and pulses. With each one it grew farther up his arms, and with every beat it spread over the nomu too, almost seeming to creep under its skin. It looked like luminescent roots. Or maybe nerves, pulling towards Izuku's hands, only to emerge as pulsing electricity. Izuku felt alive. He pulled and pulled with whatever was causing it, and the light grew. The nomu's grip loosened as it made another noise. More he needed more. All at once the lights expanded, and then exploded into a storm of sparks. The nomu went limp. Izuku fell to the ground with a yelp, only just managing to get his feet under himself and not fall on his butt. It left him standing, staring, as the sparks quickly dissipated into the air. He felt electrified. Like every nerve had been lit up, like he had way too much caffeine. Izuku had so much energy. It felt like he could leap straight up and touch the stars. Like he could run clear across the country and the noise finally reached his ears. He looked up from the very still nomu to see a crowd. A crowd he had apparently amassed during the fight. Izuku hadn't noticed them, but now they were cheering. They were clapping and cheering. There were a dozen people filming. More whispering. Even more looked odd. All at him? Izuku, he had to leave. He had to get out of here. If they knew who he was before, had there been a before? Then he couldn't stick round. Izuku didn't even know who he was. He couldn't risk something happening. He glanced to the nomu again. It hadn't moved, and did seem pretty dead. Not to mention something in Izuku's bones was telling him to run again. That he had to get out of there now. That he had to flee. So he glanced at the crowd again, and then took off. Izuku rounded a corner, quickly as he could, and found himself on a more abandoned street. He took the chance to try and launch himself forward, just to see how far he could go. Way too far, was the answer, and Izuku stumbled into another alley more than halfway down the street. Out of sight, out of the way, Izuku leaned back against the wall. Only to lurch forward again when something attached to his head hit the wall first. He reached up, hands shaking, and felt at his head. A mask. He was wearing a mask. It explained the green tint to everything at least. And the things were ears? There were buttons he found on the bottom of the jaw. Did those? The mask clicked and loosened, allowing Izuku to slip it off his head. His vision cleared. He spent a moment just breathing with his eyes closed, head tipped back against the wall. Just a moment to gather himself. He opened his eyes again and looked down at the mask. It resembled the face of a hare. Not a rabbit, but a hare. The eyes were uncannily large and bright green. The ears on top were also massive. It was honestly a miracle he hadn't noticed them before. And now that he was thinking about it, noises were quieter now. Closer to normal if he were to guess. But it was the same dusty green as his clothes. Which also looked kind of gross and dirty, now that he was looking at them. Where had he been? He kept circling back around to it. Why couldn't he remember anything? Izuku felt the tears well up. He felt them burn, and his vision blur, clawing at his throat with helplessness. He knew his name. He knew he hated a man named All for One. He knew he had woken up with no other memories, but with a headache eating away at his brain. He just wanted to go home. An address floated up in his mind. An instinctive response. He wanted to go home, and home was their apartment on the 3rd floor. Home, he still knew home. Izuku just about started sobbing in earnest. He stumbled back to his feet and paused. He couldn't go out like this again. Not when he didn't know who he was in the mask. Something to carry his mask and the hair boots. And new shoes? Maybe new clothes, if these were recognizable? Izuku took a deep breath. He didn't remember what awaited him at home, but he remembered that it existed. He clung to the knowledge that he knew it, since he only had a handful of memories in his palm. He would go home first. Old ladies working at Goodwill stores were apparently a great way to learn about the where and when of places. Izuku hardly even had to ask much. Shoes and mask stashed outside, he went in and mentioned losing shoes and needing a new set of clothes. Almost immediately a little old lady swooped in and bustled him off, chattering about, well, a lot Izuku needed to know actually. At least it's summer, so you wouldn't have frozen, dearie, she had said, intently marching Izuku back to the second-hand shoes. Goodness knows it wouldn't be that cold anyway, what with the sea air we have here and all. But oh yes, going without shoes is never fun. My cousin had to hike through the woods after losing his once, and let me tell you, he didn't have a lick of fun. Here, try these, honey. Izuku walked out with a new outfit, complete with a hoodie, and even backpack. And a remarkable amount of information on where he was. Mizudafu, Japan, apparently. Something about it felt familiar, and Izuku's only guess was that it was where he'd grown up. Nothing else clicked. No new memories surfaced. Izuku also left with a sympathetic look from Orchid, the kind lady that had helped him and also partially talked his ear off. She was from America, and had grandkids in Mizudafu she had moved here for, but she missed it sometimes. It was nice to just listen to someone for a bit. To blot out the terrifyingly empty expanse in his head with someone else's words. She did probably think he was homeless, but she had helped him, so Izuku had bowed and promised to not cause any trouble. He wished her luck with her grandchildren before heading off. The shoes mostly fit in the backpack. It was fine. Clothes enough. The mask and his old clothes, potentially a costume of some sort, fit fine though. More than well enough for Izuku to head towards home. It was the only goal he had right now. He started walking and didn't let himself think about it. The night only got darker, but that was fine. It meant Izuku got to look at the stars for the first time again. He couldn't remember any constellations, but they were very pretty. Dim, since he was walking through the heart of a city, but comforting. The stars wouldn't have changed. The stars knew him from before whatever had happened, and continued shining whether he remembered or not. There had been a before, right? Izuku hadn't been created in a lab or something and set loose. No, he remembered a home. He had the vague impression that he had grown up in this city. No solid memories, but the knowledge was there, simply telling him it was true. Not as helpful as he'd like, but Izuku would take it. The streets were quieting. He passed very few people, leaving the sidewalks mostly abandoned as the moon rose higher. It meant that the news stand and its broadcast were pretty noticeable. Izuku slowed to a stop in front of the window with multiple TVs, and then stopped to watch. Because on screen was, presumably, the nomu was obvious, at least. It looked even weirder through a screen. And then there Izuku was, leaping in on his bare feet and with his mask. He looked badass, honestly. He looked like he knew what he was doing fighting the thing, even though in reality he had been terrified. Izuku had been convinced he was flailing through that fight, but evidently not. A reporter began to talk over the video. A voiceover, he assumed, since there hadn't been any obvious news cameras in the crowd before he'd fled. We come in with breaking news. JackRabbit, the beloved vigilante of Mizudafu, has made a surprise return during a villain attack. On the screen, Izuku was saving the person the nomu had grabbed. They dropped and scurried away, Izuku distracting the thing. Or JackRabbit, apparently. A vigilante. The vigilante was believed to be dead after disappearing almost 3 months ago. This is the first sighting of JackRabbit since then, and what a reappearance it is. People are theorizing he's been hunting down what's been causing these mutated villains dash. The video cut out, flipping to a different angle and a different camera. This one captured when Izuku's hands had begun sparking. His expression was almost comically bewildered, but tinged with something powerful. The reporter continued talking. Something about the nomus, though she didn't use the name. Wait, actually, how did Izuku know their name? His head hurt as he tried to remember, so Izuku turned away from the screens and kept walking. The nighttime quiet was good for thinking, at least. It let Izuku try and sort out his thoughts as he walked. The only thing he had to focus on was putting one foot in front of the other, making his way towards a home he only remembered a fraction of. So, he was a vigilante. A well-known one from the sound of it. The knowledge cleared up a few things and confounded quite a few more. Namely why, how, when, and, importantly, what the F dash. All of which practically summarized Izuku's entire existence right now, so his hope for answers was infinitesimally small. He just needed to get home. He could start from there. Go home, find out what was there, and then everything else. Probably starting with whoever All for One was, being the only other person Izuku remembered the name of right now. Not even who the man was, just that Izuku hated him so much it apparently survived whatever had happened to the rest of his memories. Maybe he had something to do with Izuku's apparent disappearance. But then, how had he escaped? Had he escaped? From where? Why was he being held? And where had his memories gone? So many questions, and far too little information on the empty bookshelves of his mind. He could find some answers at home. His feet were taking him there, no conscious thought required, so he just had to get there. The streets didn't change much as he walked, but it felt like they did. Slowly, things looked not familiar, because he remembered none of them, but something close. It was like a sense of déjà vu washed over him. Things didn't ring a bell, didn't uproot any buried memories, but it felt like he should know them. He knew this place. He knew it, and yet, not a single memories of it surfaced. Not a moment of knowing. It felt familiar, but he didn't know why. Izuku kept walking. He held the straps of his new backpack tightly, eyes sweeping the familiar yet not street. A light flickered over his head. Was he almost home? Izuku didn't know. There was only one other person on the sidewalk right now, and houses to Izuku's right. It was quiet, and something about it was unsettling. Was it normally loud? If he was a vigilante, shouldn't the quiet be a comfort? Whether it was the lack of noise or not, something here made it feel like ants were crawling over Izuku's skin. He hurried his pace because of it. Maybe once he was alone on the sidewalk again he'd feel better. Maybe it was just the idea of being recognized like this. Maybe. Deku! Izuku flinched. Izuku flinched? He looked up, locking eyes with the only other person on the street. They were closer now, stopped a few feet from him, hands in their hoodie pocket. Izuku took in their blonde hair, spiky and shadowed in the dark night, and red eyes that were wide and almost scared? Maybe shocked? They played tag in the park sometimes. Usually when their moms were there and they couldn't go marching off to the creek, but tag was fun. Izuku was small and fast, and Kaken was the only one that could really catch him. Izuku was also the only one that could catch Kaken most of the time. This time was no different. Izuku ducked under Tsubasa and his wings, giggling as he darted across the playground. There was yelling and pounding footsteps behind him. Kaken's yell preceded him, leaping at Izuku, turning victorious as he tackled the other, and they both went tumbling. But they were both laughing. Izuku was smiling, breathless and bright as the sun above their heads. Kaken was too. He was laughing and crowing about winning. But they were happy. They were best friends. Kaken and Izuku. Drenched in sunlight and joy, they were happy. There was dread drawing claws down his skin and sinking through his veins. Izuku could do nothing but watch as his notebook was thrown out the window, and Kaken's victorious, violent smirk was aimed at him instead. "I'll tell you how you can be a hero, Deku," he cackled. "Jump off a roof and hope for a quirk in your next life." Oi, he'd really said that. Maybe. Oi, Deku. Izuku stilled, then slowly looked over his shoulder. Katsuki stood there, a few yards down the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets. He was standing there, kind of awkwardly honestly. Like he knew what he needed to say, but he was fighting to get the words out. They hadn't spoken for over a year now. Not since Kaken had gone to UA, and Izuku hadn't. So why now? He almost kept walking. Izuku just wanted to get home with his grocery bags and help his mom with dinner. It had been a long week, and they were having katsudon. But it was Kaken. Izuku had never been able to ignore his old friend. His old enemy. So he half-turned and said, "What, Kaken?" For a moment, all Katsuki did was stare. Searching and something. Izuku couldn't put one name to it, but it was like he was trying to burn up his own thoughts before they escaped his mouth. "Can we talk or whatever?" Izuku raised an eyebrow. It was probably the first sentence he had heard from Katsuki that didn't include a swear or insult since they were kids. He also looked sulky about it. Embarrassed. But was it over the words themselves, or that Katsuki was so far out of his normal depth? "I have to get home for dinner, Kaken." "Won't take long, you FNG nerd," he huffed. "Just a minute. Please." Well, now he had to. Izuku hadn't heard Kaken say, "please," unless he was around his parents since they were 4. So Izuku hummed, eyeing his old friend. "Walk and talk." He started moving without waiting for Katsuki. It was almost gratifying to hear the quick steps behind him, trying to catch up. Izuku wasn't taller than him, even if he was closer to eye level than he had been a few years ago, but he knew how to move fast. It's what had kept him alive this long. Katsuki huffed when he finally got level and matched Izuku's stride. Annoyed, or maybe amused, but he wasn't yelling like Izuku expected, so that was already an improvement. His next words, however, were not. "Why'd you give up on being a hero, Deku?" Izuku recoiled, expression immediately twisting into a scowl as he turned to face Katsuki. They both stopped on the sidewalk. Katsuki seemed remarkably calm, awaiting an answer, while Izuku felt like his own palms should begin crackling any second now. "What?" Izuku demanded. "You deaf now too? I asked why you gave up on being a hero, Deku." "Gave up? Kaken, what else was I supposed to do?" Izuku barked a harsh laugh, and then kept walking, not looking at Katsuki now. "I tried for UA. I didn't get in. They were the only hero school that doesn't automatically reject someone for being quirkless. So no, I didn't give up on being a hero, I had no other options. If that's all you wanted to talk about, then you can go home and leave me alone." "Well, you dash." "Don't," Izuku growled lowly, defeated, still not looking back. "I've stopped dreaming, Kaken. That's what you wanted, right? I've stopped trying to be a hero. I'm studying to go into analytics instead." Katsuki was quiet. He caught up again, and just walked beside Izuku for a moment. The quiet was unnerving. Katsuki wasn't quiet, not as a person and certainly not around Izuku, but he was right now. Right now he seemed like he was trying to find the right words. "You has kicked my butt," he finally said without preamble. It was so sudden it almost made Izuku snort. "Everyone there is strong. Knocked me on my butt the first few weeks, because I wasn't the best anymore. Not there. Made me shitty to a lot of people. Unsurprising. But the fuckers they still tried to befriend me, the morons. Kept coming back even when I shoved them away until I finally let them stick around a bit. And they reminded me of you. Except not a single DM in one of them had your determination to be a hero, or your stupid stubbornness to be on my level. None of them made me want to be better just to beat them. You were already better than them, and you didn't even get into UA." Izuku sighed, and closed his eyes for a sliver of a moment. He could almost see it. Him, in a class with Katsuki. Befriending other heroes to be. Taking classes at UA, being a hero. But it wasn't possible. Not now, not for him. It was a dead dream he had already buried and mourned. "Where are you going with this?" Izuku asked, just tired. "You would have been a decent hero." It was like a blow right to his diaphragm. Izuku stopped breathing, stopped walking, and closed his eyes tight. He had grieved that dream. He had cried and sobbed until it felt like the pain was finally dripping out of his body from the tears. Izuku had buried his childhood dream of getting into a hero school with whatever other bones were in the backyard. And yet here it was, being shoved in his face. By Kaken of all people, saying he could have made a good hero. The last person he had ever expected to say it, let alone now, after they hadn't spoken since leaving middle school together. Izuku opened his eyes again to see Katsuki watching him. "I was shitty to you," Katsuki continued. "I thought you should be beneath me without a quirk. That I was the best. The fact that you always acted like a hero, even as quirkless Deku, made me so effing angry because it meant you were better than me, but I didn't know why. You always made me take my head of my butt for that, at least. Just about got expelled for how I acted." Izuku breathed in a breath, and nodded, tentatively. Just so Katsuki knew he was listening. Some dumbass, the ones that insisted on being friends, they stuck around until they got through my thick skull. Made me see how shitty I was being to everyone. Patient fuckers, the lot of them. Despite the fact that they can't focus for sheet on homework. Katsuki was grinning. Izuku blinked at the sight, because it wasn't the one he knew from his old friend, old bully. It was a true smile. He really did have friends at UA. Not lackeys, not allies, but friends. Real friends. So I think you could have been a decent hero, okay? Katsuki said, slightly stilted. "I was shitty to you about it and I'm sorry." Izuku just stared, for a moment. Wide-eyed and stunned. Katsuki stared back, bordering on a scowl as the silent time ticked on, but didn't say anything more. He waited. Izuku pinched himself. "Nope, not a dream." "You're serious?" he said, half warily. Yeah, you idiot. Would not have done this otherwise. Fair enough, Izuku supposed, since they hadn't spoken in so long now. But still, kaken and apologizing didn't compute in the same sentence. Words ones Izuku didn't fully intend to say, the old fear still lingering but not enough to keep his mouth shut, practically spilled from his mouth. Why now? Katsuki shrugged easily. I'm going to be a hero. Figured I should listen to my idiot friends and stop acting like a villain first. Finally got through my thick skull when they told me they didn't mean my fighting. He was making a joke. He was so obviously making a joke that it threw Izuku for another loop. Katsuki was making a joke with him. Another pinch. Still not dreaming. Thank you, Kaken. Don't FING mention it, Katsuki huffed, turning away. Then he paused. But, tell Annie hi. The old hag has been asking about her. Izuku chuckled but nodded. I'll tell her. Katsuki nodded, mostly to himself, and then turned to walk away, towards his own home. He waved over his shoulder as he did. Izuku couldn't quite quell the instinct to wave back, even if Katsuki wouldn't see it. It left him standing on the otherwise empty street, almost home, 2 groceries bags in his hands and an apology sitting heavy on his shoulders. It left him with a lot to think about. Even as he began to head home, just slightly divergent from where Katsuki had gone, the thoughts wouldn't leave him alone. Because, even with all he'd said, Katsuki's apology and everything, Izuku had been lying. He hadn't given up. It wasn't who he was. It wasn't something he could do, just give up. Even with every roadblock in the way. But Katsuki was becoming a hero. And Izuku was a vigilante. The memories hurt. Izuku hissed, gritting his teeth as he instinctively raised a hand to cradle his head. The memories were hazy but there. A handful of images clouded by age and some sharper. Newer. Only 3 were distinct, actual memories that stuck to his head instead of the emotions alone. Kaken. He remembered, if only slightly, Kaken. Kaken who had been his friend. Kaken who had been his bully. Kaken who had asked for forgiveness, in his own gruff way. Their shaky truce. Neutrality, if nothing else. New and unsure but there. For the sake of their parents, maybe? Izuku had a feeling that was close to it, but not quite. An old nostalgia. Wanting to hold on to something they had as kids, even if wasn't the same, because it was closer. Katsuki's voice was quieter, shakier and disbelieving when he repeated, Deku? Izuku shied away. He shuffled back, keeping one eye on Katsuki, while the other remained closed as the pain gradually receded. He knew this person and yet he didn't. Not how he should. But this person knew him, and that, more than anything, was terrifying. Because Izuku wasn't who Katsuki remembered. His memories had taken himself with them. What the F dash, Katsuki said under his breath, still staring with wide eyes. Did you need something? Izuku asked as even as he could. Or? Izuku. His head hurt too much to evenly weigh the options of responding, so he responded with, yeah. Katsuki stared some more. Then he took a visible deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. When he opened them again he seemed steeled. Settled in the way a brawler set themselves to be ready, immovable. What are you doing here? Katsuki asked. Izuku did not like that tone. It was unnervingly calm. Going home. What's it to you? Katsuki blinked. Izuku didn't know how that could have possibly surprised him, but he didn't like it. He didn't know enough right now. He had to get out of here, out of this situation, before something happened. The idea of what that could be was hazy at best, but Izuku felt like something was going to jump out and get him. Like something was going to go wrong. He had to get out before that happened. Home. Katsuki said. Deku, what the F are you talking about? I'm Dash. You haven't lived here for 2 FING years. What the F do you mean going home? Izuku blinked, gaze shifting down to the concrete beneath his feet. 2 years. He hadn't lived here for 2 years, and yet it was the only place he remembered right now, if only vaguely. But if this wasn't home, then where was? And why didn't he remember it? That sure was the question of his life right now. Katsuki's voice was quieter when he spoke again. Gentler, which sent a sense of unease skittering down Izuku's arms in goosebumps. Katsuki didn't do gentle. He knew that somehow. Knew that it was weird that he was being gentle towards Izuku specifically. What happened, Deku? He asked. Izuku didn't like this. He didn't like the alarm pumping itself through his blood, and certainly didn't like how Katsuki was inching closer, hands up like he was dealing with a skittish dog. But, well, Izuku certainly felt ready to bolt. He had to get out of here. Izuku didn't know enough to know that Katsuki was safe. Especially since he was a hero, and Izuku was apparently a vigilante. Even if he didn't know, 3 memories and a tangled ball of emotions weren't enough to promise Izuku's safety. Not when one of those memories was Katsuki telling him to kill himself. Not when Izuku couldn't even remember who he himself was. He didn't feel any hatred towards Katsuki. Not like he did for All for One. But he also didn't feel much besides neutrality, curiosity, distant admiration for how strong he was and always had been. It wasn't enough, so Izuku edged away. That, apparently, was not quite the right move. Katsuki looked borderline panicked when he did. He lunged forward, reaching and grabbing as he snapped, "Deku, wait dash." Nope. Izuku didn't like that one bit, so he turned on his heel and bolted. Katsuki's disgruntled yell followed him as he took off down the street and down the first alley he found. He may not consciously know these streets anymore, but he could probably lose his old friend anyway. A mix of unpredictability and Izuku praying his feet would remember what his mind didn't. Izuku disappeared into the maze of Muzutafu, leaving behind an old friend that looked like he had been staring at a ghost 3 months dead. It wasn't hard to lose Katsuki in the maze of alleys. It was also remarkably easy for Izuku to get lost though. Well, at least it didn't seem like it was going to rain anytime soon. Izuku had seen only a handful of people since waking up, Katsuki being one of them, so he figured it was safe enough to curl up against a wall, backpack held to his chest, to try and rest for a bit. An alleyway wasn't the worst place to sleep. He had the distinct feeling he had fallen asleep in worse places. Izuku just shrugged and tried to sleep for the first time in his new memory. The sun woke him up next. Just barely rising, but enough that Izuku's vigilance registered it. Some sleep was better than none though. He was grateful for that much. The rest helped. Izuku felt slightly less scattered and panicked than before, even if he didn't necessarily have anything else to work with. The grand total of things he knew was now up to 5. His name was Izuku Midoriya. He hated All for One. He did not live in his old home. He still knew Kaken, and he was a vigilante. Maybe 6, if he included the fact that he was in Japan, but that was it. His whole life erased down to 5 bullet points. Thinking about it brought some of the dread back. He needed something to do. Somewhere to start. Home wasn't a viable option, and neither was anything to do with Katsuki, hero as he was, so Izuku had to pick something else. Maybe who All for One was, since Izuku apparently hated him so much. He was probably a villain, with a name like that and Izuku's feelings towards him. So where to start? Izuku groaned and hid his face in his backpack for a moment, still curled up against the wall. There was just so much missing. So many pieces he needed to get an idea of literally anything. But he couldn't find those in a random alley he'd slept in, so he got to his feet and swung his backpack on. He could start by walking. No destination in mind, but, well, it was something to do. It gave him time to think. He'd need to avoid heroes and cops. Vigilantes were illegal, he knew that much, and he didn't want to be caught as a civilian either. Izuku didn't know who he had been. At minimum, he didn't want to be found right now because he had a bunch of vigilante gear in his backpack. No need to get thrown in jail for crimes he didn't technically remember. Was it a crime if they couldn't prove anything? Could he be convicted if he couldn't remember what he had done? Better to not test it. Izuku hummed to himself as he got back to a main street, easily slipping into the crowd to continue on his way. He had no idea where he was going, but it was better than nothing. Deeper into Muzutafu, if he was right. Maybe he could take a train. The thought had him slowing for a moment. Izuku didn't, well, he didn't have any money. The clothes he got were technically donated, Orchid being kind enough to slip him a backpack along with them. But he had no money for a train, or a bus, or food. Another problem for him to solve this one significantly more pressing. Izuku needed water and food. He needed shelter. It all added up, and he had no idea where to start. So Izuku kept walking. He kept putting one foot in front of the other, and tried to not choke on the helplessness threatening to flood his lungs. Moving let him think. It let him not drown under the weight of not knowing what to do. He needed food and water first, and hopefully some money along the way. Then he could work towards finding out who All for One was, and why Izuku remembered him. Figuring out the other random bits of knowledge he had would be nice too. Like why he knew the monsters were called nomu, and who he had been as a vigilante. Why he had known the address of his old home, but not his new one. Why he couldn't remember more than hazy emotions around his family. Why he remembered Kaken after seeing him, but only a few memories truly stuck. Whether he had friends that missed him. How he'd apparently been gone for 3 months, pronounced dead, only to return with no memories. None of who he was, nor how he escaped. Or even who had held him. Why he had been gone. Questions upon questions upon questions. And Izuku had no answers. So he kept walking. Order of priorities, he snatched a water bottle from a passing stand. It was relatively easy to palm an apple too, and a bag of chips outside a store. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Enough to keep him going. It was as he was munching on the apple, ducking through alleys instead of the main road for a bit, that he heard it. Not the distorted cry of a nomu, but the yelling of a person. More specifically the tone of someone semi-panicked and trying to bargain. Izuku didn't even think before he was moving, swiftly ducking around corners and getting closer to the noise. Until he could make out words. I didn't have anything to do with it, honest. Yeah right, someone else all but snarled. Izuku ran a bit faster. I didn't. Not like I'd tell you if I did, but I didn't. Not like I took that much blood from him. You dash. Izuku rounded the final corner then. He pulled himself to a stop, just for a moment, to take in the scene. 2 men, looming over a young woman, who altogether didn't seem overly worried about the whole thing. She was staring up at them almost, waiting. Like she needed them to make the first move. Yeah, Izuku wasn't going to wait for her to get hurt. He began walking towards them slowly, putting on an air of nonchalance. An air that had danger in it to anyone that bothered to look. Is there a problem here? He asked, projecting to echo down the alley. The 2 men immediately jumped, spinning to face Izuku. Izuku, who was definitely shorter than them, and looked pretty non-threatening in his hoodie and ratty backpack. It was almost funny how on edge they appeared in comparison. None of your business, one of them grunted. Move along. Kinda seems like it should be my business. Izuku shrugged. With you threatening someone and all. This speech hospitalized one of our buddies. The second man all but snarled. Izuku glanced over at the woman, who was blinking innocently at him. Also entirely unrepentantly. In my defense, she said, he tried to rob me. I think it's only fair I took some of his blood, but it wasn't enough to hospitalize him. Izuku tilted his head, then glanced back to the other guys, who looked like they were about to start throwing punches. Something in his bones itched to fight. Something in his blood sang with the beginning edge of adrenaline. Izuku didn't consciously remember how to fight, but his body sure seemed to. He gave himself up to muscle memory and instinct. Izuku swept forward, ducked, and swung for all he was worth up at the man's chin. Which turned out to be quite a bit. The first man doubled over, leaving the second one shaken, fists up and staring with wide eyes. Ooh, he got you good. The woman behind him cackled. The second man eyed Izuku warily. He stood still, stood tall with his fist steady. Something in him whispered good. This was how he looked intimidating. This was how he made others leave without a fight, letting Izuku flee like the hare he was. The other man grabbed his buddy and helped him limp out of the alley. Izuku didn't drop his guard until they were out of sight. Only then did he breathe and settle his hands back at his sides. Until a presence got way too close for comfort, leaving Izuku to jump and duck away. The woman from before tilted her head at him, curious, and hands still raised from where she had been about to touch him. You're jumpy, she said. But thanks. I didn't feel like getting beat up today, so thank you, Mr. Jumpy Man. Izuku eyed her warily, but nodded. You're welcome. I'm Toga, what shall want me to call you? Because otherwise I'm just gonna name you Mr. Jumpy. Or Mr. Bunny, ooh that's cute, I might just call you that anyway dash. Midoriya, Izuku interrupted, more amused than anything. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Midori it is. But hey, you look familiar. Toga leaned in close then. Way too close. Izuku shied back, but held her squinted gaze as she stared. The light bulb that went off in her mind was almost visible. She straightened up, eyes bright and smile wide, showing long canine teeth. I do know you. You're Dobby's buddy. Izuku blinked, trying to dredge up any memory of either Toga or whoever Dobby was. The name, like everything else, only brought blankness. Maybe a feeling of fondness. A friend, maybe? Oh, that's so cool. We all kind of thought you were dead, you know, but here you are. Toga chirped, circling him, as if to make sure he wasn't actually a ghost. Dobby was super bummed. I'd never seen him so close to crying before, since it, you know, makes him bleed sometimes. Which isn't a problem for me, but it's definitely a problem for him. And I don't think he'd like it if I tried to lick his face when he was sad. I tried that with Magna once and she shoved me off a chair. She was just watching a sad video though, no one died like we thought you did. Izuku felt dizzy trying to keep up with Toga, both her words and how she kept walking in circles around him. None of it made sense to him. Except for the part where he had been pronounced dead, which he already knew. Mostly. He knew JackRabbit had been pronounced dead, or missing in action, but Izuku Midoriya was a civilian. A civilian that had been missing for 3 or so months. It was logical that he had been labeled as dead or missing, but it made even more sense now why Kaken had looked like he had seen a ghost. Izuku Midoriya had, for all intents and purposes, been dead for weeks now. Something about that sent dread dragging up through his stomach. Did dash, he began, stopping to clear his throat when his voice cracked down the middle. Did I know you? Toga stopped circling him. She paused to just look at him for a moment, probably seeing how devastated he looked, too tired and scared to cover it up. Izuku wondered if she knew him well enough before to see all of it. Do you not remember? She asked carefully. Izuku shook his head. It took a moment for the words to unstick themselves from his throat. I woke up yesterday in an alley. All I remembered was my name. Oh. Toga's brow furrowed, staring at him. Izuku swallowed back the tears that wanted to rise at being forced to think about it again. Her expression smoothed out into something sympathetic. You were pretty good friends with Dobby, and I'm friends with him too, so we saw each other a few times. You just usually have that rabbit mask on. Hair, Izuku automatically corrected, the words falling into place like he had said them 1,000 times, the shape of the sentence well worn on his tongue. Toga giggled, smiling again. Yeah. You always tell us that. Sure you don't remember? Izuku paused. Wait, you know me as a vigilante too? Oh yeah, that's how you met Dobby. He's a vigilante too, weirdo just likes to go by his vigilante name all the time. But you helped him with family drama or something that made you take off your mask, and then he dragged me into being a vigilante too, so here we are. Izuku blinked, trying to process all of that. So Dobby was indeed a friend. One that knew him as a vigilante first, and evidently Izuku trusted enough to show his real face to. And someone he had helped with family drama? Odd, but, well, Izuku didn't really have any other context. Toga didn't seem to know the details either. But a friend it was somewhere to start. Someone he had known before. Someone that wasn't a pro-hero that could possibly arrest him for being a vigilante. Could we go see him? Izuku asked. Sure. Toga immediately chirped. Come on, rabbit boy, let's go. Hair. Close enough. It's really not dash. Toga giggled, then grabbed his hand and began pulling him out of the alleyway. We've done this before. I think there's still some memories dinging around up there, maybe we just gotta pull them out. Izuku huffed, but it teased a smile from him. He couldn't help it. Toga was excited, and dragging him to someone he had known before, someone safe, and talking about getting his memories back. It was a step in the right direction. Toga, it turned out, did have some money on her. Specifically money she took off of crooks at night. Being a vigilante didn't pay well, necessarily, she told him, but it certainly helped. More than enough to get them both train tickets towards wherever Dabi lived. None of it was familiar to Izuku, but at least being on a train felt vaguely comforting. Like he was at least moving towards a goal. After they had sat down, without prompting, Toga looked at him and said, "You know, it is kinda weird that you showed up again. Everyone thought you were pretty dead. As a normal person and you know." Izuku shrugged, unsure how to answer. 'Cause disappearing for 3 months? No one ever comes back after that long. Not unless they didn't want to be found until then. Even as a body, people are usually found before that, unless someone really didn't want them found. "I don't remember what happened," Izuku told her quietly. "I can count on my hands the things I know right now." "Ooh, what are they?" Izuku huffed in amusement, leaning his head back against the window. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I hate a man named All for One. I'm a vigilante. I have a childhood friend I called Kaken, and the monster I fought last night is called a nomu." Toga made a huh sound, sharp and curious like a cat. Izuku was just thankful the train car wasn't full. The sound of the tracks would cover most of their words, so he could mention being a vigilante. Even if it was safer not to. "I have no idea who All for One is," Toga told him. "Or what a nomu is. Oh, but if it's one of those monster things on the news then maybe I do." They were quiet for a moment. Toga broke it by reaching over to knock at the side of his head. "You weren't kidding, it really is empty in there," she giggled. "Yeah. Don't worry, we'll fix it. Dabi's good at fixing things. He helped fix my blood problem, so maybe he can fix your brain problem too." Izuku blinked over at her, curiosity rising. "Blood problem? You mentioned blood earlier too, is it a part of your quirk?" "I can change into other people." Toga smiled wide, showing off her sharp teeth again. "Like a vampire," Izuku realized. "But I also need blood, or else I go a bit crazy. But that's 'cause I need a lot more iron than normal people. It's good in tea and cake. Magna made me a blood cake for my last birthday." Izuku grimaced at the idea, but shrugged. Not like he needed to drink blood to live. It probably tasted fine to Toga though, who did. It was interesting either way. "So how did Dabi help?" "He showed me how to be a vigilante. If someone's gonna commit a bad crime, they may as well forfeit some blood. Only the actually bad ones though, or else Dabi looks all disappointed at me." Toga leaned in closer, grin and eyes big and aimed at him. "Did you know some drags make blood taste nasty?" "I hadn't thought about it. Others make it sweet. So does diabetes. Alcohol's kinda gross though. Gross spicy." "Huh, okay." It was pretty interesting, all things considered. Toga nodded sagely, leaning back slightly. "Being a vigilante's pretty cool. I get blood, and not as many people hate me. Heroes do though. But a lot of them are fakes, so that doesn't matter as much." Something about the way she said it, something in the phrasing, rang a bell. It echoed in his head, rebounding off empty shelves where memories should be, but a small something was there. Some amount of familiarity. Izuku didn't have much time to think about it though, because the conductor announced their stop. Toga immediately perked up. She leapt to her feet, grabbing Izuku's arm to haul him after her. He was helpless to do much but stumble after her off the train and out of the station. Her pace was quick, eager, and excited. Izuku got his feet under himself after a minute. Enough that he could keep up at least. Keeping up with Toga's chatter was another thing though. "And I think you've known him for like 3 years? Maybe 4? You were a little baby vigilante when you first met, Dabi told me that. You were even tinier than you are now. Which, wow, were you being starved while you were not dead? Because I'm pretty sure you had more muscle last time. But that was a while ago, so I could be wrong. Either way, Dabi is a mother hen, so he'll probably try and feed you as soon as you get in the door dash." Izuku had the distinct, jittering feeling that this should be familiar. The chattering, the keeping up with quick conversation. Did he do that? Was that something he used to do? Because the feeling he had was that he was getting a taste of his own medicine, maybe from when he was slightly younger or just excited. Their surroundings eventually got that same sense of déjà vu Izuku had earlier, in his old neighborhood. Familiar but not in a way he remembered. Toga continued pulling him along, pointing out things. A small store she liked to grab snacks at, a corner she had bitten someone, another alley she had knocked a hero out in once. Even a shop she giggled about buying Dabi a Father's Day card once, for some reason. None of it brought memories back for Izuku, but it was fun to listen to, at least. Toga eventually turned sharply, tugging him in through a door and towards stairs. Izuku squeaked as he was almost swung right into a wall. Not that Toga hesitated, instead bounding right up the stairs like a deer, leaving Izuku to climb after her at a slightly more cautious pace. By the time he caught up to her, Toga was already waiting for him on the 4th-floor landing. Without further ado, she skipped down the hallway, stopping abruptly at a door towards the end. She knocked before Izuku caught up again. She also continued knocking until Izuku caught up, ignoring the disgruntled yell of, "1 minute," from behind the door. Izuku, in a mild panic, grabbed Toga's arm to stop her repeated knocking. All it did was make her switch to the other hand. Resigned, Izuku just waited for the door to open. It took another few seconds, but then the door was flung open, revealing who Izuku assumed was Dabi. He was scarred. Very, very scarred. Burn scars that stretched across his jaw, his arms, and, undoubtedly under the long sleeves he wore, judging from the marks across the back of his hands. His blue eyes were glaring at Toga, until they fell on Izuku. Then they went wide, and Dabi froze, like if he moved then Izuku would disappear into thin air. "Surprise!" Toga chirped, throwing an arm around Dabi's shoulders and leaning onto him. "Guess who's not dead?" Izuku, unsure of literally everything, awkwardly waved before cutting it off to hold onto his backpack straps instead. "What?" Dabi breathed, the F-. Izuku supposed there were worse reactions. Izuku's head hurt. But he remembered. He remembered Dabi. He remembered meeting the man as a vigilante, covered in his JackRabbit mask. He remembered being so happy that there was someone else like him, another vigilante, and one that didn't seem opposed to being friends. Not enough to deter Izuku, anyway. He didn't have many clear memories of the man, but he knew they were friends. Maybe not close, but still friends with a sense of camaraderie for being fellow vigilantes. Izuku knew that he trusted him. Knew that Dabi had let him in behind prickly walls, partially because Izuku broke them down for something? There was a reason. It clung under his tongue, stuck out of sight. It was there, Izuku just couldn't remember. But he remembered Dabi. Remembered flying above the Mizutofu skyline with him. Izuku hazily recalled dozens of times he'd helped patch up the man, or crashed in through his window, needing somewhere quiet. And again there was something else. Another reason Izuku visited. A reason he remembered sneaking through the window and knocking on the door, smiling, happy. The emptiness, the missing pieces, gaped in his mind like an open maw. Imposing and dark in the way that he couldn't see where it ended or began, merely the edges that defined it. Izuku was getting tired of there being abyssal gaps in his mind, and he hadn't even been awake for more than a day. But still, he remembered Dabi. Which was why he didn't immediately lash out when Dabi yanked both him and Toga through the door. He carefully kept the door from slamming, closing it quietly instead. To not draw attention. Izuku looked around while Dabi leaned his head against his front door for a moment, gathering himself. The place was relatively clean. Lived in and loved, with a faded couch and skis pushed in a corner of the kitchen counter. Glasses left in the sink, a mug beside them, and the TV paused mid-frame. It was achingly familiar. Izuku knew this place, could probably navigate it in the dark, and yet he had forgotten. Even if he kind of remembered it now, the loss left a sinking dread to eat holes in his veins. "Okay," Dabi said, spinning back around to face them. He pointed right at Izuku. "Have been gone. For 3 months. Where the F were you?" Izuku faltered, not knowing how to answer. Dabi absolutely noticed. He closed his eyes and raised a hand to his forehead and temple, and Izuku somehow knew it was him trying to get his thoughts in order. "He doesn't remember," Toga cheerfully declared. She had migrated to the kitchen and was helping herself to the coffee pot. "Woke up yesterday or something, but everything before that poof. Gone." Dabi blinked, then shifted his incredulous stare back to Izuku. She's right, Izuku quietly admitted. I woke up in an alley. I remembered my name and that's about it. So you don't remember me? Or that dumbass? No, I kind of do. Izuku brightened, just a slight bit. Once I saw you, I think I got a few memories back, but it's more like I remember you as a person instead of specific memories? Explain. I think I remember when I met you I was happy about meeting another vigilante. And hanging out here, I think? Did I come through the window? Dabi stared for a moment more, then sighed, nodding. When you came to visit? Usually when? Dabi hesitated. He looked at Izuku, considering and cautious. Something almost seemed to rumble in Izuku's mind. A distant thunder, an approaching earthquake. Like a cresting wave ready to crash. He subconsciously braced himself. When you came to visit Shudo, Dabi said. The park at midnight was probably the last place Izuku expected to find a UA student, and yet here he was. Izuku had been there first, to be fair. Taking the night off of being a vigilante to just sit. Enjoy the night for once. Maybe brood a bit about corruption and old friends. The UA Sports Festival had him thinking about Kaken again. How things could have turned out, how they could have gone differently. Kaken had won. Aunt Mitsuki must be proud. The last thing Izuku had been expecting, though, was to find the second-place winner of said sports festival wandering into the same park he was in. Shudo Todoroki. Quiet, powerful, and so obviously hurting. Izuku had watched the sports festival and done analysis on the students' quirks for extra credit in one of his classes. He'd had to pause on Todoroki's fights, because he looked sad. The kind of sadness that burrowed into marrow and made itself a part of someone. The kind that didn't get there for no reason, nor easily disappear. Izuku had ached for the other boy that, maybe if things had gone differently, would have been his classmate. But there was no use dwelling on could-have-beens, so Izuku put it out of his mind. Until Todoroki came walking into the park and it all flooded back in. He stopped on the sidewalk, just now noticing Izuku. Neither said a word, but Izuku nodded to the swing beside him. A silent invitation. He didn't mind sharing the swing set he had grown up on. Even if he had no idea why Todoroki would be on this side of town, let alone at this specific park. It took a moment of staring, but Todoroki eventually took the opportunity and sat on the swing next to Izuku. The night was quiet besides the creak of old chains and brittling plastic. Izuku knew what he wanted to say. He also knew he didn't have much to lose, nor would he get this opportunity again. So to Todoroki he said, "I'm sorry about your dad." The other boy nearly fell off the swing. As it was, he frosted over the chain in his right hand and jerked his swing sideways because of it. Izuku just watched and waited, only slightly second-guessing himself. He held Todoroki's gaze when he whipped around to stare. The effect of his glare was damped by the fact that his swing was still unevenly swaying from side to side, one chain frozen stiff. "What do you know about my father?" he said coldly. Izuku shrugged, trying to keep up his nonchalant facade. "I figure there's a reason you don't use your left side, right? Must be something pretty serious, since you kind of froze yourself during the sports festival. And I've followed heroes for a long time. Endeavor isn't." Izuku tried to think of a word to say, one that may soften how Todoroki was now glaring daggers at the ground. Everything felt too kind for what he was thinking. Todoroki finished for him, still glaring at the ground. "He's a busy." Izuku took a single second to process that, to realize that was basically confirmation that he was right, and then he was leaning back, still holding onto the swing chains. "Yeah, that," Izuku sighed. "I can't say I blame you then, even if I don't agree with it." "Explain. Please." Izuku looked over, locking eyes with Todoroki. One blue and one gray. There was something in them. Something almost begging for answers. "Not using fire just to spite your dad, I get it. But it's hurting you," Izuku said, softly but sure. "It's your quirk, not his. He probably won't care either way, so why hurt yourself in the process? Don't you want to be a hero?" Todoroki was staring. His eyes were wide, and locked onto Izuku like he was just now seeing the world. Light color was finally seeping back into his sight, sitting on a swing set in Mizudafu at midnight. Shudo finally saw the person in front of him, and decided green was his new favorite color. "Do," he whispered. "Then be a hero." Izuku shrugged. "You're stronger if you use both sides, so use it to save people. Be better than him." I don't know you or Endeavor, obviously, but I know statistics, and Endeavor has high rates of property damage. High arrest rates, but also high casualty rates, and a high focus on arrests instead of reform dash. You really think I can be a better hero than him? Izuku blinked, leaning on the chain closer to Todoroki. I know so. But you don't know me. Izuku shrugged again. Then tell me about yourself. Izuku wasn't prepared for what he learned that night, but he wouldn't trade it. Wouldn't forget it. He went back home with a new friend and a new number in his phone. Shudo knocking on their door, bloody and bruised and barely standing, was the last straw. The sight stuck with Izuku as he ran. It lingered and clung like dripping oil, iridescent in its horror. He leapt over rooftops and flew on hare's feet, ears listening for what he wanted, what he needed. He had met Dabi before. Now he just had to find the man again, because Izuku had a theory. One he needed to find out if it was correct right now. Because Izuku had heard whispers. He had his own theories, and scraps of evidence gathered from the handful of interactions he'd had with the man and what he'd heard from Shudo. It was enough. It had to be enough. Izuku had to be right, and he prayed that Dabi would be willing to go along with his harebrained idea. He just had to find the man first. Izuku found him in an alley, burning a body. No matter. There were more important things right now. He dropped off the building and right to the ground, not bothering to quiet himself. Dabi spun around with blue fire in his hands. Izuku didn't care. "Tuya Todoroki," he said. Dabi went stiff, haunted, and that was all Izuku needed to know. "Shudo's hurt," he said before Dabi could flare any brighter blue. "And I'm not letting him go back to Endeavor. Can you take him?" Dabi blinked. He blinked some more, the fire fizzling out in his hands. Izuku wondered if this was what a person rebooting looked like. What? The F dash dot. Fair enough. Izuku shrugged. "But I'm serious. Can you keep him? At least until Fuyumi or Natsuo can." "Fuyumi won't," Dabi answered, almost automatically. She thinks he can change," Izuku quietly filled in. "I know. And Natsuo is in medical school, he can't keep Shudo right now. But he's hurt, and I will not let him go back there, so please. I would offer myself, but our home is already full, and Dabi, he needs you." Flames flickered to life between Dabi's fingers again, and Izuku wondered if he had misjudged. Maybe Dabi hated Shudo. Maybe he resented him for being the perfect one, like Endeavor had bragged. Maybe he blamed Shudo. But Izuku held his ground and hoped. Dabi took a deep breath, and with almost glowing blues he said, "I have an apartment. It's not a good place for a kid. Anything's better than with Endeavor." "You're not wrong," the vigilante huffed. "Yeah, sure, fine. Where is he?" "My apartment." Izuku ignored the surprised look Dabi gave him as he began walking, expecting the other vigilante to follow him. He knew what he was doing. He knew the sheer amount of unearned trust he was putting in the man, but this was for Shudo. If it kept his friends safe, then Izuku would do whatever he had to. No matter what. Izuku came tumbling in through the window, a sight so common Shudo didn't even look up from his homework. "I come bearing gifts." Izuku crowed. That got Shudo to look up, curious. Izuku proudly presented the bag of goodies. "My mom's soba," he announced, immediately fishing out a container to hand to Shudo when he made grabby hands for it. "We had leftovers." "You always have leftover soba," Shudo idly noted as he dug in. Izuku grinned, keeping his secrets behind his teeth. His mom knew Shudo loved soba. She also knew Dabi was barely making ends meet with Shudo still in school, and sent over food pretty much whenever Izuku visited them. Which was often. Neither Shudo or Dabi had ever mentioned anything, but Dabi's knowing look when he handed back empty Tupperware said enough. It wasn't long before both of them were sitting side by side on Shudo's bed, a movie playing on his laptop. Homework hadn't stood a chance. There was always tomorrow anyway. It was at some point halfway through the movie, during a calmer part of the plot, that Shudo slumped over and bonked his head into Izuku's. "Did I ever say thank you?" he asked. It would have sounded calm, idle, if there wasn't a nervous tone lurking behind the words. Something only Izuku could hear, probably. "For what?" "Everything." Izuku huffed in amusement. "Anything more specific, Sho?" His friend shrugged. "You saved me. I wouldn't have any of this without you. So everything." The earnestness was going to kill him. Izuku leaned into Shudo's side, smiling softly. The movie continued to play. "You're the one that made something of it," he whispered back. "I just helped a bit." "Stop being so humble." Izuku snorted. Shudo quickly followed, and they dissolved into quiet laughter. It barely registered as something to be thanked for. To Izuku, he had just been helping his friend. Making sure he was okay. Making sure he was safe. It was the least he could have done. Izuku nearly collapsed into the side of the couch. He stumbled, but caught himself, even as Dabi lunged forward to keep him from falling. The extra hands helped stabilize him against the onslaught of new memories and emotions. Shudo. He had forgotten Shudo, forgotten his friend. One of a few he instinctively knew, but Izuku couldn't remember the rest. He had friends, but he couldn't remember them. Not their faces, not their names. But he remembered this one now. "You took him in," Izuku all but wheezed, trying to get his knees to work properly again. "After I found you. That's how you know me." "Yeah, Jack," Dabi sighed, easing him into a kitchen chair now. "Didn't leave me much choice with it." "Yes, he did." Toga chirped from the counter, stirring some kind of syrup into her coffee, now also full of ice. "You told me when you were feeling sappy. You missed your itty-bitty baby brother Dash." "Himiko," Dabi hissed. "I'm right and you know it," she cackled. "You said it was the best thing to happen since the video and that's why you dash." "Moving on," Dabi snapped. "We can talk about that later. But the little sheet's on a mission right now, so he isn't here." Izuku nodded, acknowledging the point. Even if the sudden memories of Shudo make his heart ache with longing to see his friend again, to be fully reminded of what he looked like and who he was, he couldn't do anything about it. Dabi sighed again, slumping into a chair at the table too, arms crossed on its surface. "He'd be here tomorrow if I told him you're alive." "Seriously, Izuku, what the hell?" "I wish I knew," he grumbled back. "Even without his memories, JackRabbit still saved me." Toga giggled from the counter she was now sitting on. "Yeah, that sounds like you. Always a hero." Izuku wordlessly grumbled, but something warm glowed in his chest at the words. It meant something to him. It had in all his memories. And, well, he had to have become a vigilante for a reason, right? Izuku hoped he got that memory at some point. For now he held the ones he had close. He rested his head on his arms while Dabi and Toga dissolved into playful bickering, playing back all the memories he had so far. Kaken, Shudo, Dabi he remembered and ran through each memory with a desperate kind of reverence. They had been in his mind once before, and now he had them again. His precious few memories. There were still so many missing, so many holes and blank spaces, but less now. Slightly. Izuku held on to what he had with a mental white-knuckled grip, and tried to not think of what else he was missing. Way too much had happened today, and it was barely early evening. "Izuku would like a nap, please." He did not get a nap. Instead he got more glances like Dabi still couldn't believe he was alive, and Toga offering to go grab them takeout for dinner. She skipped out the door with a promise to not get blood on their food if she ran into trouble. Dabi made a face at the door as she left, like he didn't quite believe her. Izuku quietly huffed in amusement at it. Mainly because something told him that wasn't new, even if he hadn't known Toga very well before he lost his memories. Maybe Dabi had mentioned her before? The man made a dramatic groan before getting to his feet from the kitchen chair. "Come on, I have a box of your vigilante sheet you can have," he said. "Pretty sure you shoved some clothes or something in there." Izuku huffed softly, amused. "Are you saying I stink and need new clothes?" Dabi glanced over and deadpanned, "Yes. You smell like fabric softener and sweat." Izuku snickered but conceded the point. His own clothes would probably be better anyway. He was keeping the backpack though. Dabi went towards his room. Izuku trailed behind, taking everything in to remind himself what it looked like. It was odd he remembered the layout of the apartment, even where things went in cabinets, but couldn't remember specifics. If he weren't staring at it, he wouldn't have been able to recall the color of the wall or how many picture frames were on it. He could walk this place blindfolded, but still forget what the pattern on Shudo's door was. His contemplations were cut off by Dabi's victorious noise as he pulled a box from the back of his closet. It was pretty much just a box. Nothing special about it, besides the word JackRabbit scrawled on the side in marker. Still, a sense of anticipation zapped down Izuku's spine. Kitchen, Dabi huffed, hefting the box in his arms. Izuku once again trailed after him. Dabi set the box on the kitchen table, freeing Izuku to pull open the top and see what was inside. An extra suit was on top, like the one in his backpack right now. Green and armored. Another pair of the hare-footed boots too, though these ones looked older, less refined. Under them were normal clothes, but on top of those were knives. Knives on a rope, with a weight at the end. Izuku carefully pulled them out, just to hold them in his hands. They settled in his grip like they were meant to be there. With deft, knowing movements, he coiled the rope and swung one of the knives in a circle. Faster, faster, until it was whistling in its short circle. "You're Kayaketsu Shogue," Dabi told him, leaning back against the kitchen counter. "You're a nasty fucker with them, even if you don't use them often." "I kind of remember, I think," Izuku softly admitted. "Muscle memory sure seems to still be there." "Yeah," Izuku huffed. "It's everything else that isn't." Dabi hummed, acknowledgement and giving Izuku space. He twisted the rope to stop the knife from spinning. It felt familiar. With the weapons stilled, Izuku set them aside to continue digging through the box. There wasn't another mask, but that was fine. The one in his backpack worked fine. More clothes were neatly folded in the box, along with yet another set of Kayaketsu Shogue, the ropes more worn on them than the first set. Under those were 2 notebooks, their spiral spines poking out from under a shirt, clean and crisp and new. 2 sets of gloves were nestled next to a jacket. Izuku put the first set of Kayaketsu Shogue back, and traded them for a soft-looking shirt and pants. He wondered if they had been intentionally left, or if they were just something he'd left over here once and Dabi had dropped in the box. Not like he could remember which it was. But they had been folded. So either Izuku had intentionally left them in the box, or Dabi had found them, washed them, and left them nicely folded in the box instead of thrown in a heap. Even after he had gone missing. Questions upon questions. At least there was one Izuku could ask about, and hopefully get an answer to. "Hey Dabi," he said slowly, looking up at the man. "When I asked you to take in Shudo and then brought you back with me, why did you trust me? I don't remember much, but I don't think we knew each other well yet, did we?" The man eyed him for a moment, then sighed, slumping in on himself. "We didn't." Izuku waited. He watched Dabi and waited for him to continue. Eventually the man broke, making a disgruntled noise, but giving in. "It's probably going to trigger another memory thing," he warned Izuku. That only succeeded in making anticipation buzz through Izuku's limbs. "I need them back, Dabi. Tell me." "Yeah, fine," he sighed. "You fought Stain to protect some UA student and a Hosu hero. Someone filmed you 2 arguing in the street about ideals before Stain passed out, and it blew up online." The bite of a regained memory had teeth this time. Izuku JackRabbit right now, vision-tinted green, stood over a paralyzed UA student and a Hosu hero. Tenya Ida and native. He held his ground, Kayaketsu Shogue knives in his hands, even as he stared down death. Stain stared back, unblinking but considering. His katana dripped blood onto the pavement. Izuku was shaking. "JackRabbit," Stain said slowly. He was not shaking out of fear. "Stain," Izuku growled back. "Leave them alone." Rage, protective and righteous and burning, licked at his ribs and tried to escape through his skin. Izuku swore he would be glowing with it, if he had a quirk related to such a thing. "They are false heroes, little vigilante," Stain said, almost like a teacher might. "So they must die." "He's a student." Izuku barked back. "Who are you?" The armored hero student croaked. "Tenya Ida." There was no way to mistake that Ingenium armor, and Izuku had seen the sports festival. He knew the UA students. "JackRabbit," Izuku said shortly, never taking his eyes off of Stain. "Just hang on a bit longer, alright? It'll be okay." He just had to defeat Stain. Just had to dodge enough to find an opening. It was what JackRabbit did best, being quick, jumping out of the way, only to come back kicking twice as hard. But this was Stain. Izuku knew about him. Knew that his quirk was unknown, but extremely strong. Knew he was quick, judging from how fast he had leapt away after Izuku's opening kick. Knew he wanted the people behind Izuku dead, and that he couldn't let that happen. He needed backup. Izuku wasn't even supposed to be in Hosu tonight. Shudo had said he was patrolling the city, and so Izuku had made plans to, coincidentally, run into him. And he had. It had been nice to see Shudo again, and to make sure Endeavor wasn't hurting him. Izuku had suited up to go run Hosu afterwards, as the sun was setting and gave way to his nighttime playground. But that was when the things attacked. Monsters right out of a horror story. No one knew what they were. No one knew where they had come from, nor what they could do. Izuku had done the best he could to help people with what knowledge he had. Then he had heard a scream, and he hadn't even thought before running down the alley. Now here he was, facing down the hero killer, phone hidden in one hand as he tried to subtly text his friends where he was. They'd know what it meant. They had to. Even if Shudo was the only one close by. "He will not change," Stain said, sure of his words. Sure of himself. Better to uproot a selfish hero now than to let them fester. "He can learn," Izuku insisted. "I know you've changed over time, so why can't he?" "I am Dash." "Why, Stendhal?" Stain didn't outwardly flinch, but he did shift back. Just a half step, but it was something. It was all the opening JackRabbit needed. He was moving before either of them could blink, knives lashing and feet leaving the ground. Izuku leapt and knew he'd miss. Stain dodged, leaving him to rebound off a wall. It also left him right in the way of a knife as Izuku rocketed himself back towards the villain. Blood for blood, Izuku got Stain with the curved hook part of his blade, and in return a knife cut through part of his sleeve. It lit up his nerves with more than pain. It had him immediately launching himself upwards out of a sense of danger. Stain's sword missed him by inches. JackRabbit snarled, swinging his armored foot and readying his Kayaketsu Shogue. Stain leapt away before they could connect. It left Izuku to land on the ground, once again between Stain and the heroes. Stain went to move, only for fire to burn down the alley, cutting him off from Izuku. Shudo. The sheer relief of knowing someone else was here to help almost brought tears to his eyes. Izuku felt like he could finally breathe for a moment. He turned, just enough to catch sight of his friend. Shudo was eyeing him suspiciously, edging closer, like he was going to have to put himself between the downed heroes and Izuku too. JackRabbit's ears dipped at the sight. He understood though. He didn't look like Izuku right now. "Shudo," he said softly. He could almost see the pieces clicking into place. Shudo's eyes flicked from his mask to his pocket, housing his phone. Then he looked back up into glowing green eyes. He opened his mouth, and Izuku could see the shape of his name in it. So he quickly shook his head and insisted, "I'm JackRabbit." Shudo looked confused again for a moment, then processed it. Enough that Izuku could see him visibly set it aside for later. "Todoroki?" Ida said. "No, what are you doing here? Leave." JackRabbit focused back on Stain, on how he was readying a throwing knife. "They're both paralyzed. Something about Stain's weapons, maybe his quirk, probably blood. Don't let him get close." "No." Ida practically sobbed. Izuku's ear angled back at the noise, but he didn't turn. Not when he had to immediately dodge Stain. "He's mine. This is my fight." Izuku huffed as he launched off another wall, Stain ducking under his kick to go for Shudo. He leapt again as ice blocked off Native from Stain. "Then get up," Izuku yelled. He took his eyes off of Stain for a moment, just a moment. Izuku glanced back to check on Ida and Native. To see if they could move yet? One moment was all it took. Stain was on him in the span of a blink. Something slimy brushed his arm, where the knife had cut through his sleeve earlier. And suddenly Izuku was on the ground, unable to He snarled at Stain, who was quickly sent leaping backwards by Shudo's fire. That, at least, made Izuku happy to see. They had been working on it. Shudo didn't seem to do much by halves, and had thrown himself wholeheartedly into relearning his quirk and being friends with Izuku. Now he was here, the only one fending off the hero killer, because Izuku couldn't get his stupid limbs to move. Why? Izuku looked over, Ida just barely in his line of sight. He was crying. Why would you protect us from him? Aren't you a vigilante too? Why do you care? Izuku grit his teeth, still trying and failing to move. He didn't have a good answer. Because what kind of an answer was, I had to? There was never another answer or option for him. Never a chance he could have walked away. Instead of that though, he answered with, I'm a vigilante so I can be a hero because every school and law said I couldn't. Ida was quiet, but Izuku could hear his sharp inhale all the same. So I won't leave you to die. I refuse, Izuku hissed. Vigilantes try to help. Stain is nothing but a murderer. Stain's katana stabbed toward Shudo, still falling from his ice, unable to move quick enough. All he could do was stare with wide eyes as the blade fell towards him. All he could do was flare fire on the side Stain wasn't on and spike ice across his hand. Izuku screamed, and suddenly he was airborne. Stain didn't react in time. Izuku kicked him in the ribs with both feet, launching him backwards. The villain flew all the way out of the alley and onto the street. Izuku had barely touched a solid surface, he was only half certain it was the ground before he was flying right after him. Stain did dodge Izuku's landing. Which was probably for the best, since Izuku was decently sure he had already broken a few of the villain's ribs. Another kick like that and he may collapse the hero killer's lungs. Izuku stood up, ready to spring if he had to. But the hero killer moved slowly, cautiously, as he raised his katana between himself and Izuku. His ribs probably hurt. Don't touch them, Izuku snarled into the smoke-filled air. They are false heroes, Stain spat back. All the fakes must be purged. Even if they're kids? Better to pull out corruption by the roots before it can spread. Izuku grit his teeth, seething at the very idea, pure fury railing against the confines of his skin. Kids his age? Students. That's not how you fix anything, he snapped. Stain tilted his head a few degrees, the full weight of his stare falling on Izuku. His katana dipped. Izuku kept his Kayaketsushogue knives in his hands, but didn't swing them. They both acknowledged that this was a verbal argument right now. An action of honor. Purge the false heroes, Stain said, the ones in it for money and fame, the ones that don't act like heroes should, and the rest will see. Only then will they learn. That's stupid. The hero killer drew up short, and it was almost funny. He'd probably never had anyone be so blunt with him. Likely on account of the murder and knives. But Izuku currently didn't give a shit. He shoved the fear down behind his mask and stood tall, his words projected to carry. You don't even hold to your own ideals. Izuku said. Ingenium he makes the same amount as his sidekicks to make sure they're his equals. Native does more outreach and cultural education than most heroes in the world, let alone Japan. They dash. Sky Fury funded a dozen children programs. Izuku barreled on, recalling Stain's previous victims. The ones mourned by the community around them. Groundhog dedicated his time to mental health education. Spotlight volunteered at community theaters. They didn't deserve to die just because they made money for being a hero. They were fakes. Stain hissed back. Liars. Fame and attention was all they wanted dash. Fame is a part of being a hero dash. It shouldn't be dash. Agreed. Stain pulled up short once more, falling quiet. Izuku was breathing heavy. But he didn't drop the hero killer's eye. A paycheck relying on fame is bullshit, Izuku agreed. It leads to too much corruption. But no one deserves to die for a system they aren't in charge of. It doesn't change anything. False heroes, Stain said again. Lady Volt, Mysterio, Nape Man, Quiet Step Dash. Izuku winced, recognizing the names. Heroes that Stain had killed. Ones that had scandals come out after their murder. Embezzling, manipulation, overall corruption, those ones Izuku didn't have a defense for. But that didn't make it right. They still didn't deserve to die. They sully the title of hero. Stain spat. Their blood will dash. Izuku started spinning his Kayaketsu Shoge again. The blades whistled as they spun, faster and faster. Stop making excuses. Society won't change just because a random heroes die, so don't use that to justify being a murderer. That seemed to make Stain angry. Enough that he was leaping at Izuku again, turning into a red blur as he darted in close. JackRabbit zipped to the side, knives lashing out on their ropes. Stain dodged within inches. A hero is anyone that helps someone else. Izuku barked, flinging a knife out to block one Stain through. Anyone. Weak dash. Izuku threw himself at the man with a kick, which cut off his words. He was yelling back as soon as he hit the pavement. If you save someone, then you're a hero, just like All Might. All Might is the only dash. Anyone. Izuku screamed back, just missing Stain's back with a knife as the man rolled away. If you save someone on a roof, you're a hero. If you talk to someone when they need you, you're a hero. If you keep someone safe on their way home, you're a hero. If you help someone when they need it, then you're a hero, license and title be med. Off to the side, limping out of the alley, Ida muttered, but legally without a license dash. The law, said Shudo. Native, on Shudo's back, made a reluctant but agreeing sound. I mean, whoever JackRabbit is, he seems pretty heroic to me. Shudo nodded sagely. Exactly. Ida said nothing, but he watched the fight between vigilante and villain with searching eyes, like he was trying to find the answer he needed in what they were screaming at each other. And what about underground heroes, huh? Izuku continued. You've killed them too. Fakes dash. They intentionally get no media attention, you dash. Izuku snarled and swung around to kick at Stain again. He had his Kayaketsu Shoge in hand, lashing out and ready to wound the hero killer. But Stain fell still, and Izuku made himself freeze. Inches from the hero killer. JackRabbit stopped, hovering as the man stood still. Something was different. Something was wrong. Izuku slowly backed away. He put his foot back down and reeled in his knives. Stain didn't move. His eyes were open but blank, his breathing shallow. Barely there at all. He was still standing, somehow, but he was no longer conscious. Stain slumped like a cut marionette when Izuku went to move him to the ground. Careful, Izuku lowered him, making sure his skull didn't crack against the cement. Villain he may be, but Izuku sure wasn't one, so he made sure the villain wasn't in danger of keeling over onto whoever next touched him. But the fight was over. Izuku let his anger uncoil behind his mask. He grit his teeth, he breathed and let it go for now. No use kicking an unconscious man for his ideals. Not with people watching. There were people watching. Izuku looked around and finally noticed the crowds. He saw Shuto and Ida in the mouth of the alleyway, native with them. All alive. Not unharmed, but alive. Izuku looked around and saw heroes inching forward, so he did what JackRabbit did best. He ran. Izuku caught himself against the table, wincing at the pain that lanced through his head. But he remembered. Remembered Stain and Shudo and some of the aftermath too. He knew Shudo had been fine with him being a vigilante after they talked. Vaguely, he felt like he should be remembering someone else too. Someone he had seen in the aftermath. Their face was blurry and their voice distorted, but they were there. A specter haunting the edges of the memory. So that's why I trusted you. Dabi shrugged, drawing Izuku's attention again. You had the ideals. And they didn't change after getting to know you, both as Izuku and JackRabbit. So yeah, we became friends. Kinda impossible not to, you're a persistent little sheet. Dabi huffed in amusement, and Izuku nodded, still slightly shell-shocked from the intense memory. The video went viral, Dabi continued. Pretty sure that's when you became Yuzudafu's beloved vigilante. Dabi chuckled, probably amused at the memory, but Izuku could only nod, brow furrowing. I caught a part of, a news report, Izuku said. After the nomu, someone said that. Dabi snorted, figures. You're pretty well like Jack. Dabi paused then, eyeing Izuku. I caught a part of one. Thought it had to be a copycat though, since you've never been able to make a light show like that. Being quirkless and all. The memories bubbled up like molten rock. I'm sorry, Izuku, I'm so sorry. Stupid, quirkless Deku. I'm sorry, kid, but no. You can't be a hero without a quirk. Izuku winced, the memories cutting into his head. His mom that had been his mom. He had been trying so hard to not linger on how he had forgotten her face and voice. Other than her kaken. And someone else? Something about that one was blurry, painful, like he didn't want to remember it. Like he didn't want to recall the face attached to it. But he had been quirkless. He had known that, somewhere in the back of his head, but Izuku just hadn't thought about it. Because he had pretty obviously used a quirk to take down the nomu yesterday. Izuku looked down at his hands. He had made sparks during that fight. He had dragged something out of the nomu and into himself. Energy maybe? As vague as that was, it was the best guess he had. Energy draining or energy transferring seemed like his best bet at the moment. But he was quirkless. He had been quirkless all his life. What had changed? When had it changed? I don't know how I did that, Izuku whispered. I was quirkless. I didn't lie. He felt Dabi's eyes on him before he heard the man sigh. Then a hand was set on his shoulder. The chill of it was something Izuku felt familiar with. The touch of a friend who was meant to have an ice quirk, but instead housed fire in his heart. You were gone for almost 3 months, Dabi carefully reminded. Weirder shit has happened. Izuku nodded, amused and comforted in about equal measures. Yeah, I'll figure it out. Your whole thing is quirks, I'd be more surprised if you didn't. Izuku snorted, but Dabi wasn't wrong. He knew it in some hidden part of his mind that tearing apart quirks was what he did. Connecting dots and drawing lines for analysis, it was fun for him. And now he had his own quirk to do the same with, apparently. Would his younger self have been happy? Would Izuku have been elated about the development before he lost his memories? Or would it feel like cheating after being quirkless for so long? He didn't know. Izuku didn't want to know, maybe. All he had was right now, a growing handful of memories, and a quirk that he had no idea how to activate or control. He was snapped out of his morose thoughts by Toga slamming open the front door and yelling, "I'm back with food." They were standing maybe 10 feet from her at the table. Dabi's neighbors definitely heard her. His deep, answering sigh was so resigned that Izuku couldn't help quietly snickering. Toga dropped the bags on the table, before her eyes locked onto Izuku. "You look like sheet," she cheerfully declared. Then to Dabi she said, "Midori gets first pick of the chicken." "W, this is my house dash." Are you picking on the baby?" "Baby?" W dash. Izuku suddenly found his head wrapped in Toga's arms, tugged down to be framed over her shoulder. He has no memories. Babies have no memories, so baby. I have a few now, he protested, muffled by one of Toga's arms. Just a tiny little baby. Dabi rolled his eyes. He's taller than you. Only by a bit. And wait, how old are you? Izuku had to think about it for a moment. 19, I think? You think? Izuku stared until they both remembered he had no memories. His age wasn't one of the things that had stuck around. Hang on, Dabi sighed, and walked over to a calendar pinned to the fridge with a magnet. Toga finally released Izuku, pushing him towards the takeout boxes she had dropped on the table. He dug through them while Dabi grumbled about something. They both noticed when he went quiet. Izuku looked over and saw Dabi making a sour face. Almost angry. Not at either of them, but, well, something. You're 19, Dabi said, in the measured way people did when trying to not let their voice shake. Your birthday was last month. When we thought you were dead, Dabi left unsaid. Izuku leaned over and saw what Dabi was staring at. On their calendar, scribbled in handwriting he vaguely recognized, was a note about his birthday. It was left pristine, but surrounded by dots of ink. Like someone had gone to scratch it out many times, but couldn't bring themselves to. He had spent his birthday somewhere he didn't remember. He had spent his birthday with everyone he loved thinking he was dead. Toga hummed, and then hugged him. Izuku knew he needed it when his vision went blurry and something like grief began clawing at his throat. He had been gone, and he couldn't even remember where. "It's okay," she said gently. "You're here now." Izuku choked on the first sob and the second. Toga lowered them to the kitchen floor when his knees began to shake on the third. Dabi joined them by the time he was gasping in a breath that shuddered through his lungs. For all intents and purposes, Izuku Midoriya had been dead. Did he count as alive if he didn't remember who he had been? Could he still bear the name of a person who had disappeared along with his memories? His tears held no answers, but at least the warmth and chill at his sides reminded him that he was alive. That he had friends. People that were here even though he was undoubtedly different. Because memories made a person and Izuku had very few of those. "Sorry," he sniffled once his tears had begun to slow. His chest still spasmed with his diaphragm, but he was breathing. Didn't mean to dash. Presumably, Toga meant to boop him on the nose. In actuality, she poked his cheekbone, just barely missing his eye. "Oh. Oops, but it's okay." Lots of emotions stuck in your head since there's no memories filling it up. They have to get out somehow, right? Toga then jumped back to her feet and proceeded to snag the containers of food from the table. She then dropped them in Izuku's lap. Food time. The topic change was dizzying. Izuku didn't fully mind though, not with Toga shoving chopsticks into his hand and pushing another container towards him. Dabi grumbled about them being right next to the table, but accepted the aggressive care as well. It was nice. "Can I show him the stain video?" Toga asked, mouth full of rice. "Oh wait, memory stuff dash. Already got that one," Izuku mumbled tiredly. "Dabi told me." "Neat. So I can show you the video, which is what made you super famous, by the way. It was so funny, heroes kept trying to arrest you after and people would stand in front of the cop cars and pretend to not see you. That was hilarious. Where's my phone dash?" Izuku quietly huffed, about the closest to a laugh his tired body could get right now. But he ate his chicken and rice and watched the video Toga pulled up, putting the memory into sharper focus. He laughed quietly as she played other ones about him. A few he hazily remembered, and most he didn't. Actions he'd done so often that they became normal in his mind. He had saved people, Izuku realized. So many people that they had begun to blur together. He didn't remember it, but he had been a hero. Toga then excitedly showed him the videos she'd saved about Dabi, much to the other vigilantes' exasperation. By the time those finished, it was well past dark and Izuku's but hurt from sitting on the tile. Dabi's knees cracked as he got up, because he had stayed with them on the floor despite rolling his eyes at the videos. "I have a perfectly good couch, you gremlins. And then bed." "Okay, Dad," Toga snickered. "Fuff. I call the guest room." Toga sang as she skipped over to the couch. Dabi rolled his eyes again. "You usually take Shudo's room anyway," he told Izuku. "There's probably still some of your clothes in there or something." Izuku nodded. He went to follow Toga again but paused. Can you tell him I'm alive?" Izuku asked. "I kinda don't have a phone." Dabi didn't even hesitate before he nodded. "Sure, later. Little Sheet's supposed to be asleep right now since he's out of the country." Izuku smiled, small and tired but there. "Thank you." Midoriya, Toga whined from the couch. "I have a Dabi falls on his face video. Come watch it." "Why?" Dabi sighed. Izuku just grinned and sat on the couch. Izuku woke up to morning sunlight shining in through a window. It was something he had probably seen 1,000 times, but never held on to. Never considered that he'd one day forget it. He spent a sleepy moment just staring at how the light shone in. How dust motes danced in the beam of it. Something shuddered in his head, pricking with a faded memory behind his eyes. There wasn't much distinct about it, but the emotion to the memory remained clear. The softness. He remembered this room, in the hazy way where he couldn't pinpoint where anything was, but knew it was this room. A morning like this one. Colder, the light tinted white instead of warm yellow, and Izuku waking up with a hand slapped across his face and a leg thrown across his torso. Shudo liked to starfish in his sleep. But he was half warm, and Izuku was comfy, and they had stayed up late playing Minecraft instead of sleeping. Dabi never minded when he stayed over anyway. Slowly, like the memories were emerging from a fog, Izuku remembered a couple dozen other sunlit mornings like that one. Different rooms, different lighting, and a varying number of limbs tangled with his own. Nights he'd come over to see his friends, and they'd all end up crashing. There were other faces in the foggy memories. He knew them. He knew them, but he couldn't focus on their faces. Their features slipped through his grasp when he tried. Izuku and Shudo had other friends. Friends Izuku couldn't remember. But they were there. Izuku could vaguely recall a room with a galaxy painted on the ceiling, and he knew in his bones that the constellations were correct and that he had helped paint them. They woke up to the smell of coffee there. Another quiet and empty except when they were there, and mornings where they all woke up tangled and tiredly schlepped down the street for breakfast. A third, covered in posters of heroes, that held such a soul-deep sense of home that it left Izuku feeling breathless. The memories were so warm. It ignited an ache behind Izuku's ribs, a longing that tugged at him, pulling him somewhere he couldn't see. Friends he couldn't remember, except for one, and places he knew and yet didn't. He wanted to go home. Even though he couldn't remember it, or who was waiting there for him, Izuku wanted to go home. He wanted his memories back. He wanted to know why they were gone in the first place. He wished the sunlight held answers. Izuku stared for another few minutes like it did, until he finally dragged himself upright. His head didn't hurt much anymore. Nothing like the pain of when he'd first awoken in that alley. The smell of coffee helped him wake up slightly more. Enough that he heard voices drifting over from the kitchen, low but familiar. A first since his mind had been almost wiped clean. Izuku rolled out of bed Shudo's bed, which was entirely too comfy, and sleepily shuffled his way to the kitchen. With half-open eyes, he almost tripped over a chair before falling into it. "He lives." Toga chirped from somewhere on his right. Izuku grumbled, head pillowed on his arms and words muffled. He still caught Dabi's mutter of, "way too soon," though. The sound of a mug being set beside his arm triggered the echo of a memory. Without looking, he already knew it would hold his favorite tea. Caffeinated and sweetened with an unholy amount of sugar. Dabi had done it so many times before that it was practically muscle memory to take a sip and say a quiet, "thank you." "So what's the plan, Bunny Man?" Toga asked. "Let him wake up," Dabi chided gruffly, also supping from his mug. "It's too early." "It's almost the afternoon, though." "He's nocturnal." "So am I, but I'm awake." "Yeah, and it's effing weird." Izuku softly snorted, enjoying his tea and content to just listen to Toga and Dabi go back and forth for a bit. Because, honestly, he didn't have a plan. He just needed answers. And Izuku didn't know where to find those. Not yet. But he may know where to start. "Hey Dabi," he asked once the caffeine had started to kick in. Both Dabi and Toga quieted when he spoke. Did you know what I was doing before I disappeared?" The man hummed, expression turning thoughtful. It shifted halfway into a grimace as he thought. Izuku subtly shook his head as Toga's intense staring turned into raising her finger to poke him. "You were looking for a villain, I know that much," he grunted, swatting away Toga without actually looking. "But you didn't tell me who or why. You were pretty secretive about it, but I figured it was Vigilante Sheet. You had a notebook or something though. Pretty sure dash." The memory hit Izuku like a beach ball to the head. Not altogether that painful or shaking, but still disorienting. Izuku sat back at his desk, straightening up against the back of his chair. Some amount of joints crackled and popped. He had, just maybe, been hunched over the surface for slightly too long, but it was worth it. Because he'd done it. He had filled his first full notebook, all in his own code, detailing every debt, mission, and alliance he had forged since becoming a vigilante. Every enemy, every analysis, and a copy of all the information he had ever given to someone. All contained in one bound book. He wasn't done. No, far from it. But he had finished this one and it was perfect timing, really. He was beginning to search for All for One's trail, and that would require a book all its own. But for now he closed the small notebook softly, marveling at the cover. Plain cardboard in a pretty red, decorated with various stickers his friends had gifted him. The edges were soft and peeling, worn from use, and from Izuku shoving it in his pocket so many times. Pride softly glowed like a hearth fire in his chest. Izuku couldn't help smiling, hand resting on the soft cover of his notebook. Well loved, well used. Proof of his progress. Proof that he was doing something and doing it well. Proof that he was a hero. You didn't leave it here, Shudo would have found it. No idea where it could be, but you always had one of the things on you. If I know how you managed that. Izuku nodded, wincing and rubbing at his temple for a moment. Right. He had notebooks on his allies and enemies as a vigilante, which was useful. Or would be if he knew where the thing was. He also might have a notebook on All for One, if the hazy, passing thought from the memory turned out to be true. Izuku had no idea if he would be able to find it, or even read it if he did, but it may exist. And that in itself meant something. It meant he had been hunting the man. It meant All for One may be why he had disappeared, and maybe who he had escaped from. Might even the reason why he had lost his memories. It would explain the hatred still burning away between his ribs. It meant finding All for One may give him the answers he desperately needed. Izuku cleared his throat, wincing at how it rasped from the brief flash of pain. Do you know anyone I would have talked to? Someone that would know who I was looking for? Dabi grimaced, crossing his arms as he leaned back against the counter. Maybe Ichi? He has his nose in everything, might know something about whatever you were doing. The name rang no bells, but Izuku nodded anyway. He took another sip of his tea. Oh, I know him. Toga eagerly added. I can take you to him if you want. He's supposed to be working a shift at this one bar dash. How the f, do you know that? Dabi muttered. He's useful, Toga said, grinning with all her teeth. So I know. What to say, Midori, wanna go? Izuku hummed, needing just a moment to think. Even if his mind was mostly static. A mix of still waking up and the sheer amount of information he had to consider, namely all the blank spots. Would any enemies he'd had notice he was back if he went? Would they learn about his lack of memories, and come after him? Would Ichi even have the information he needed? Did Izuku have another option if he didn't? Could he just go home instead? Izuku nearly bit his tongue to stifle a yelp. He hissed through gritted teeth instead. There was no memory this time, no information or realization, just a screaming sense of dread that told him going home, his actual home this time, was a terrible, terrible idea right now. He couldn't go home, he couldn't. He couldn't risk them, he couldn't put them in danger. The panic faded slightly, like a receding wave, taking the pain with it. Izuku tried to just breathe. To try and untangle what had just washed over him. There was logic behind the fear. Izuku had no idea what he had escaped. He didn't know if there were eyes on him, or if he was being hunted down, by heroes or villains alike. If someone had seen him take off the mask, then heroes would be looking. And whoever he had escaped from, potentially All for One, may be searching for him. He couldn't lead them home. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Izuku refused to put them in danger. Even if he didn't know who the was. A hand settled on the back of his head and neck, cool to the touch. It helped ease the ache. Helped soothe the emotions that decided to drill themselves into his skull. Is that going to happen every time you remember something? Dabi asked above him. Izuku shrugged, opening eyes he hadn't realized he closed. The sight of tea and tabletop greeted him. Not a memory this time. Just emotions, I think. Dabi made an acknowledging sound, still using his hand as an ice pack on the back of Izuku's head. It helped. He had definitely done it before. I can't go home, Izuku said quietly after a moment. Why? Too dangerous, he muttered. I don't know why, but I thought about going home and the idea of it hurts. Your mom has definitely already seen the news though. Izuku blinked. Does she know I'm a vigilante? You kidding? Dabi snorted. Your mom had me clocked the second you brought me through your door? Yeah, Jack, I'm pretty sure she knows. Maybe not specifically what you were doing, but she absolutely knows you're a vigilante. Oh. Dabi removed his hand, returning to the counter to retrieve his mug. He turned back to Izuku with a slight grimace, but resignation in his eyes. I won't tell her I saw you if you think it's dangerous, but then I can't tell Shudo you're alive either. He'd call her the second I hang up. Izuku nodded without thinking. His immediate response was to agree. If it kept his family safe, then he would do it. Even if it left his friend the singular one he fully remembered in the dark. It was just for now. Just until he figured everything out. So, Toga said, "Still wanna go?" Izuku nodded, shaking hands, lifting his mug to drink again. "If you think he'd be able to help, then yes." "Yay!" Toga launched herself out of the kitchen, disappearing while Izuku was still slowly blinking at where she had been. Dabi snorted. "Finish your tea, Jack. You're gonna need it." Izuku made a vague noise of agreement, sipping the tea while it was still warm. Surely a few more minutes to wake up wouldn't hurt? Toga barreled back into the kitchen, hair in twin buns now and clothes thrown over her arm. "Don't forget your costume," she chirped. "And your mask. This is a vigilante place, bunny boy." "Hair," Izuku automatically corrected. Toga's laughter followed her back around the corner and down the hall. Izuku sighed but chugged the rest of his tea. He had a feeling Dabi was right, he would probably need the caffeine. If only to deal with whatever awaited him with Ichi. Whether it was more memories or a lack of them. He said another quiet thank you to Dabi as he set his mug in the sink. The man nodded, still nursing his coffee, looking entirely done with the day already. Izuku vaguely wondered if he had a day job he was working today. Retreating back to Shudo's room took no thought. He lifted his costume from where it had been set, the fabric familiar in his hands. Something he had done hundreds if not thousands of times. Izuku didn't even have to think as he suited up. It let his mind wander slightly. It let him wonder. It let him trace the empty places in his mind, keenly aware of how the memories he did have were still blurred at the edges. How they were there, but distant. Like some of them hadn't been him. Or, maybe, like he was missing so much context, so many pieces, that they may as well have been from a different person. In the quiet of his friend's room, Izuku catalogued his memories again. His name was Izuku Midoriya. He hated all for one. He had woken up in a Mizudafu alley without memories, had fought a nomu which he still didn't know why he knew the name of those, and subsequently found out he was a vigilante. A popular one too, apparently. Both with civilians and other vigilantes, and maybe even underground heroes. With informants too, from the sound of it. Enough that he kept information in a notebook. Enough that he had filled a notebook. He had a childhood friend and bully named Katsuki. Kaken. Who had been really surprised to see him a few days ago. Izuku figured it had something to do with being pronounced dead for a few months. He had a friend named Shudo. Shudo had gotten hurt, and so Izuku had found Dabi and gotten Shudo away from his father. Who was Endeavor? Izuku had then befriended Dabi, both as his civilian self and as JackRabbit. He had other friends he couldn't remember, but knew existed, and Izuku knew he loved them. He had family, but the memories of them hadn't reappeared. And, honestly, Izuku was trying to avoid thinking about it. Because what if? Well, there were many what-ifs, but mainly, Izuku just felt a panicked sense of keep them safe. He had regained some memories, and yet Izuku knew it was only a handful of what he had once had. The emotions clung. More than the memories did in some cases. Izuku knew how he felt about things and people, but clear, conscious memories were far fewer and farther between. But it was better than the nothing he'd started with, so he'd take it. He recalled the memories in their entirety like replaying a film. Izuku tried to make sure every detail stuck, every second. Because what if they went away again? What if this wasn't the first time he'd forgotten? No, he couldn't think like that. Izuku shook his head, mask now in hand but not yet on. He was here now and getting memories back. Dabi and Toga hadn't acted like this had happened before. Izuku took a deep breath, held it, then slowly exhaled. He could do this. Talk to the person Dabi mentioned, then go from there. Keep going forward. Get more memories back and find out who he had been, so he could figure out how he had gotten here. Find out why his memories were gone, and maybe he'd find out how they were gone. And then he could fix it. Hopefully. Izuku quietly closed the bedroom door behind him, putting aside the memories it brought for now. They left out a back door, masks hidden and clothes inconspicuous. Izuku still had on his hair shoes, but they were something Dabi said he had worn out before and no one noticed. Just made him taller if anything. The hoodie over his shirt hid enough. No one would recognize him without the mask, which was currently in his backpack. Toga talked as they went, happily explaining anything and everything that came to mind. I was going to take you the roofway, she told him about 3 steps out the door. But Dobby said that was a bad idea, since you probably don't remember how to roof hop. And then I wanted to do it anyway, but he said he'd take away coffee privileges if I did, and he's the only one with a fancy machine. So no rooftops, Izuku said. So no rooftops. Not yet at least, because I think you'll remember as soon as you're up there, but Allie's work too. The place isn't even that far, and since it's so early we'll probably be the only ones there. Cool. There was quiet for a few seconds. I was wondering, Izuku hummed, does anyone know where the nomus come from? Nope. They just kinda appear, and then disappear. They teleport or disintegrate or something. They appear near All Might a lot though. That sent a feeling of something skittering down Izuku's spine. It felt correct. It also felt foreboding, like he was forgetting something crucial. They're weird, Toga giggled. I want to bite one. Huh. I want to see what they taste like. Like, is their blood human blood? Or alien blood? And what would that taste like? Well, now Izuku had no choice but to think about it. I think they'd be like weird jerky, Toga continued. Or maybe rubbery. So bad jerky. Or cardboard. Some of them have looked kinda crunchy. Izuku made an agreeing sound, even though he only half knew what she was talking about. She wasn't wrong though. He imagined some of the nomus had looked crunchy. And rubbery. The one he fought certainly seemed like it. What if they taste like dried fish? Izuku wondered. Toga paused, considering. Gross, but wouldn't be the weirdest thing I've had in my mouth. Probably second though. Izuku was silently, morbidly curious. Toga did not elaborate. He didn't know if that was better or worse. They continued, both talking about whatever came to mind. Izuku asked about the city around them. Toga was happy to elaborate with actual information, along with stories about anything nearby. She told him about Dobby and Magna. Stories about vigilante exploits were common, and shared with a kind of glee that came with watching someone react who had never heard them before. He asked about her costume too. More specifically, her lack of one. Toga had on a black undersuit filled to the brim with knives and needles, he knew, and a brown cape over it. Could theoretically look like wings. But to Izuku they just looked like fuzzy, dead leaves. Mostly he asked about her lack of a mask. Oh, I don't need one, Toga explained, immediately confusing Izuku. Sometimes I work at blood places, since I'm good with needles, but sometimes people pay me to pretend to be them. So I don't have to worry about being caught at work or anything. And Magna's day job makes enough that I can just do vigilante stuff for the most part. She said I don't have to work if I don't want to, I just have to do the dishes. Izuku nodded, mentally noting another thing about Magna. Toga's big sister or something similar, from what he could tell. It was sweet. But sometimes I don't look like this when I go out and do actual vigilante stuff, Toga continued. So no one really knows it's me. Oh yeah, I guess that does that sense. So it's real easy to hide from heroes and cops. And if I ever do get caught, I just fake my death. Lay low for a bit and then boom, no one's chasing me. Izuku nodded because it vaguely made sense and then stopped. How many times have you done that? 15, she chirped. I've even won money off it. Made a bet with some cops when they didn't know it was me. Her grin showed off her canines, sharp and smug. Izuku couldn't help laughing. It lifted something off his shoulders, to just be. To laugh at Toga's antics on their way to hopefully find more answers. It also served to distract him, because the next thing he knew, Toga was suddenly cheering, "Here we are." Izuku glanced up at the building. They were going in through a back door, no signs around, but Toga seemed confident they had the right place. It seemed normal. Like a normal restaurant that would have a bar in it. He made sure to pull on his mask before stepping closer. Oh, Toga said, pausing before the door. You probably don't remember my vigilante name, right? Izuku nodded. Toga grinned, all teeth, and twirled around. With a flourish of her cape she bowed, all sharpness and excitement. It's Calyptra. It suited her, Izuku immediately thought. even if he didn't know what the name meant. Toga, however, either noticed something in his expression or thought he wouldn't know, because she continued. It's a type of vampiric moth, she stage whispered happily. Magna named me. Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Without further ado, Toga's grin turned mischievous. She spun around, and without any more warning, slammed open the doors, loudly yelling, "Ai!" as she did. It made both Izuku and the man behind the counter jump. Calyptra, Ichi sighed. What brings you here? Info. JackRabbit dash. Ichi's eyes immediately snapped up and locked onto Izuku, who froze. He wasn't expecting the man to laugh, breathless and shocked, as he stared at Izuku. You're really alive, Ichi said. Holy shit, JackRabbit. Everyone thought you were dead, and that it had to be a copycat or something on the news. Izuku shook his head, rapidly trying to get his feet under himself in the conversation. I was just on a mission. That went wrong. Ichi's expression immediately went somber. Sympathetic. Not something Izuku was expecting from a bartender that served vigilantes. Probably villains and underground heroes too. Then we're glad to have you back, he said. There was such sincerity in the words. Izuku teared up behind his mask, silently nodding his thanks. He had been a well-known vigilante. He had been a beloved vigilante, according to the news. Someone people looked to for help and hope. Someone that saved people, even though the law would crash down on his head if he didn't stay at least 2 steps ahead. Izuku had been that vigilante. Now, he wasn't quite sure. So, what can I do for you? Information? New gear dealer? Well, maybe not that one. I still don't know where you got yours, JackRabbit, but woo. That's a class all its own, Ichi rambled, significantly cheerier than when Toga had burst through the doors. Izuku smiled, a bit small and overwhelmed, but there. I just have some questions. Dabi thought you may have the answers. Ichi nodded, idly organizing and cleaning behind the bar. Without much thought he passed over 2 glasses of water. Shoot then. Do you know who All for One is? Ichi paused, looking over at Izuku with a raised brow and suspicious wrinkle to his forehead. Are you kidding? No. You asked me the same thing months ago, JackRabbit. What? Are you double-checking I told you the truth? Izuku rapidly shook his head, hearing the edge creeping into Ichi's voice. There was a reason the man was here. Realized belatedly. A reason he had stayed long enough for Toga to know him. No, nothing like that. Izuku paused, breathed. He steeled himself and dragged the truth from his throat. I don't remember. Whatever I asked you before, I don't know what your answer was. Ichi eyed him again, searching. Izuku knew he probably looked slightly like a wet rabbit. Ears drooping on his mask, eyes big and kind of teary behind it, and defeat in his posture. It was enough for Ichi to marginally drop his suspicion at least. The mission went bad, huh? He said, softer now. That bad? Izuku nodded. I'm just trying to find answers. And All for One is one of the only names I remembered. Dangerous, maybe, to freely give out that information. But if Ichi knew something, anything, then it would be worth it. Izuku could take that risk. The man sighed, but nodded to himself. I don't know anything about All for One. The only time I heard the name was from you, actually, but I told you to go bother Yagusa about it last time. You were busy up until you disappeared, so I assume she had something of interest. Izuku exhaled, a half-mix of hope and disappointment warring in his gut. It wasn't directly the information he needed, but it was something. Better than nothing. Another lead. Thank you, he said quietly. Happy to help, Ichi smiled. And good to know you're alive, JackRabbit. Izuku grinned back, something warm settling over his jagged edges. The memories, the lack of them, didn't cut quite so sharply. Not when there was someone telling him they were glad he was alive. That they had been worried. Onwards to Yagusa then. Toga cheered, jumping back to her feet. She's out at Dash. That one American place, Ichi piped up. Oh yeah, come on bunny boy. Hair, Izuku tiredly corrected. Toga just laughed, and dragged him right back out the door. Izuku turned to wave to Ichi before they fully disappeared. The man, distinctly bemused, waved back before the door shut. So off they went, Toga dragging Izuku through the alleyways he had once known, towards a person he had already spoken to before. He hoped there were answers waiting for him. They took a train this time, which meant hiding Izuku's mask in his backpack again. And Toga's cape. No one batted an eye at the two of them otherwise, thankfully. Or, not because they were vigilantes, at least. Toga's conversation topic of top 10 blood types may have been the reason there was a slight buffer of seats around them though. Not that Izuku was going to complain. The debate was interesting. He had personally never thought about how bird blood would rate compared to human blood, but Toga apparently had, so now Izuku was. Rats were, apparently, at the bottom of the list. They got off the train still on the same topic. But what about octopi? Izuku wondered aloud as they wandered away from the station. Don't they have blue blood? They do. I've never had one with blood though, just the cooked ones. Now snails dash. Izuku made a face, which Toga laughed at. Snails? I was 5 and thought they'd taste good, she answered. They were weird. Izuku snorted. Yeah, I'd think so. My dream is to eat an ice fish, Toga declared. Because they don't have hemoglobin or hemocyanin, and I wonder if I'd be allergic to it. I don't think that's how it would work. But how would you know that's not how it would work? Izuku opened his mouth, then closed it, conceding the point. Toga grinned smugly. She skipped along, probably about to bring up some other silly topic. That was about when they heard the yelling. Both of them immediately exchanged a look, then broke into a run. Towards the sound, obviously. Toga was already palming one of her knives. Izuku frankly had no idea how many of those she had right now, and he didn't want to try and count. He had his Kayaketsu Shoge in 2 hidden pockets. No conscious memories of how to use them had surfaced yet, but they still felt familiar. Enough to keep them close. Even so, Izuku hoped he wouldn't have to use a weapon he couldn't consciously remember how to wield. That hope diminished as they sprinted for where Izuku could now see rising smoke. Izuku and Toga both skidded around a corner and came face to face with a building on fire. People were screaming. Some were running out of the entrance, others pointing up at windows. More still were calling for heroes and firefighters. All of them were staring though, mainly in terror, because the building had a gaping hole in one wall, crumbling at the edges. And in it stood a nomu. This one was charcoal black, flames flickering over its body, glowing with embers under its skin in cracked and magma-bright lines. Its blank eyes stared out at the crowd. Wicked claws tipped its hands, each easily as big as Izuku's arm. Its mouth was studded with alligator-like teeth poking out of the sides. It didn't move for a moment, which let Izuku take in the situation. The fire was climbing. It hadn't consumed the entire building yet, but it was going to soon. Smoke billowed out of every nearby window. People were still screaming. No heroes had arrived yet. There were no sirens in the distance, and no one coming to help. Just them. Just him. The only silver lining was that this nomu wasn't lunging at random people. Not yet, at least. But it was something. Betcha this one is crunchy, Toga said under her breath. Izuku hummed, amused for a moment. Probably tastes charred. Yeah. Like Dabi's burnt food. Izuku snorted. The next second he was moving, belatedly realizing it was because the nomu was also moving, and he had jumped into action without thinking. Quite literally too. He cleared the distance between where they stood and the nomu in 2 long, leaping strides. The nomu's eyes locked onto him, and something in them sparked. A violent awareness that hadn't been there before. Izuku had all of 2 seconds before fire was roaring towards him. The nomu made a crackling, gargling noise as it watched him dodge. Izuku landed nimbly on a different section of sidewalk, the fire going into a wall. Which thankfully didn't catch. Not that Izuku had long to be grateful for that, since more fire was coming for him the very next moment. Landing again, closer this time, Izuku didn't let his eyes leave the nomu. It didn't blink. It didn't move much at all actually, which was a problem. The building was still on fire, and the nomu had lumbered maybe 1 step. People were going to get hurt if nothing changed. Izuku had to lead it away from the crowd, or at least the building. Enough that the fire could begin to be put out once a hero or firefighters got there. That couldn't happen if the nomu was still there though. So he had to get it to move. A careful step backwards had the nomu's eyes following him. Izuku retreated another step, facing the nomu all the while. Light on his feet, he took a small hop back. The nomu exploded into motion, faster than Izuku thought it might. With a yelp he hurriedly ducked behind the nearest wall. It led into an alley. No fire escape on this side of the building, so no people. It was empty. A small burst of thankfulness struck behind his collarbone, something small and viciously relieved. It meant Izuku could fight without someone else there. No one to intervene, no one to get hurt. It quickly dissipated as the nomu came crashing in after him. Claws missed Izuku by a hair as he ducked, teeth snapping in their wake. The opposite wall gained a new crater as the nomu rammed into it. Izuku leapt backwards without missing a beat. Farther into the alley, farther from the street and people and deeper into the shadows. The nomu followed with slicing, jerking motions. It didn't try to burn him again, at least. The fire had died down to only show in the cracks of charcoal skin, but now he had to worry about it catching him. Izuku jumped at the wall, angling himself to launch upwards. He pushed off and flew above the nomu, which stopped to watch him. It didn't follow as he rose to roof height. Distance he needed distance. Touching the thing with fists was asking to be burned. Getting near it at all seemed like a terrible idea, with the claws and teeth and fire. As Izuku began to fall back to earth, gravity taking hold once more, he pulled out his Kaiketsu Shoge. He handed in a crouch. The nomu made another crackling sound, regarding him with nothing but violence. Izuku didn't put much thought to his next movements. It was second nature how the knives settled in his palms, rings and rope coiling at his elbows. It all fit so easily. Like they belonged there. The sharp edges felt like extensions of himself, the rope just another limb. A part of himself that he, hopefully, hadn't fully forgotten. Please work, Izuku silently prayed, then leapt into action. He began to swing one of the knives in a circle, the other held still in his other hand. The nomu watched with an unaware blankness. Then, like a switch flipped, it threw itself at Izuku again. The force of a train bearing down on him, Izuku moved with instinct. He lashed out with the already spinning knife, throwing it with all the momentum it had built up as he leapt to the side. Izuku almost froze with shock when the knife hit true. It sunk in deep to the nomu's shoulder, metal almost immediately glowing with the heat there. But it hit. The nomu bellowed, a deep and disturbing sound. Izuku didn't have more time to consider his success before he had to dodge again. He yanked the one Kaiketsu Shoge back to himself as the nomu barreled by. The metal was still vaguely glowing. Izuku breathed. In and out, quick and ready. He still knew how to use his weapons. That was good. Amazing news. Muscle memory had stuck around somehow. Now he just had to use them, not think about it too hard, and try to remember what he did last time to activated whatever quirk he apparently had. Because something told him, some faint memory wisping to the surface, that knives weren't going to be enough. Izuku didn't know how he knew that, but it felt right. His Kaiketsu Shoge seemed tiny in comparison to the nomu, but his quirk, which he was still trying so very hard to not think about, had worked last time. It would probably work again. If he knew how to activate it, that was. Izuku threw his Kaiketsu Shoge again. And again they struck true. Both this time. Even as he dodged claws and rebounded off a wall, pulling them back to him and dragging longer wounds as he did, his movements felt natural. Like he had done this 1,000 times before. He probably had. Izuku didn't think about it too hard as he fought, letting his panic fall to the back of his mind. Swing and throw. Pull back, dodge, leap for all he was worth. Go up when he needed a second to breathe. The nomu didn't seem inclined to follow him skywards, at least. Not when he fell right back down towards it. There wasn't a solid minute to focus though. A minute Izuku desperately needed. The fractions of moments weren't enough for him to dig into his soul and find whatever quirk he had now. It wasn't long enough to figure out how to make that strange electricity come back. But he had to try. Each throw, each pause the nomu took, he tried. He tried to claw something up, to think hard until something happened. To rifle around his barren brain in the hope of producing some kind of spark. On one throw of his Kaiketsu Shoge, The nomu got too close. A burst of fear lit behind his collarbone. Izuku snarled, wrenching himself away as fast as possible. Sparks danced over his hands as he did. It felt like energy writhing under his skin. Slippery, hard to hold and handle, let alone direct. Like Izuku had been handed an eel and told to aim it like a gun. But the sparks were something, so he kept trying. What had he done last time? Izuku tried to think as he leaped back a step, swinging the Kayaketsu Shoge out and stabbing the nomu's arm. Last time he had been in danger of death, the nomu holding him by the neck. He had dug his glove's claws into it. The nomu slashed at him with claws again, Izuku dropping to duck, slipping to the side. Maybe he had to touch it? It was all he had, so it was worth a shot. Izuku jumped back up, sidestepping another slash. Skirted it until he was right at the nomu's side. Fire was an ever-present danger, but especially this close. Where was dim, where wouldn't he get burnt? The back of the arm that had just slashed at him wasn't as on fire as the rest of the body. Izuku took the opportunity without more thought. He slapped a hand onto the charcoal flesh, trying not to grimace at the heat already rising through his hand, and tried to dig his nails in. Lightning bolts exploded from where he touched. Hungry tendrils glowed green over the nomu's arm, overtaking the coal-glowing light it had. It made a sound, low and pained, as it moved to swat at Izuku. The nomu seemed slower now, and Izuku felt like he'd just hit a sugar rush. Green sparked off his hands and up his arms. Izuku dodged, jumped up with one Kayaketsu Shoge flying, and lunged forward. It would work. It had to. Hand outstretched, he leapt towards the nomu again. He didn't actually get that far. A sense of impending danger had his hair standing on end. It had Izuku changing course, launching himself backwards with one foot. The quickest direction change he could manage. A good thing he did too, because the next second someone hit the nomu like a falling meteorite. The impact shook the ground. The nomu left a crater in the alleyway concrete. It twitched, but didn't move much more. Not for now, at least. But standing on it, rising to their feet in the clearing cloud of dust, was an angel. Izuku felt something in him shake loose. He stared, waiting for the dust to clear more. Even in the settling, he could make out a silvery pair of wings, outstretched but beginning to fold back to rest, and the fading engine glow of a jetpack built into them. The shine of a visor could almost be mistaken for a halo. When the dust cleared a bit more, the figure straightened. Izuku could see what looked almost like a space suit now. Slightly slimmer, easier to move in, created for shock absorption instead of surviving the vacuum of space. Over the person's chest was what looked like armor. A bulletproof chest plate, silver in color, to match the wings. Their boots were obviously designed for shock absorption too, almost like Izuku's. Necessary, he imagined, since they had fallen from the sky like that. The cloud dissipated a bit more, and with it came a voice. Izuku? The name? He could guess now sounded so relieved. On the verge of tears from it. Relieved and happy, and like grief had been lifted from shoulders too heavy to actually hold up hope. Emotions flooded Izuku, immediately drowning him in their riptide. The air was wheezed from his lungs as he stumbled on suddenly shaking legs. Love boiled up behind his ribs and seared itself into his heart. Platonic, he vaguely registered through trying to sek in a breath, but something fierce. The sheer loyalty that felt like it was beginning to claw its way out of his skin had teeth. It dug into his lungs, suffusing every breath. He inhaled, and it was thick through with love that was trying to clog his throat like heavy humidity. He knew them, Izuku realized. He knew her. But who was this? Who had he known that made him feel like he would snarl and bite and protect until they were safe? Who had he known that made Izuku feel like going to war was worth it, if it kept them alive? Pressure expanded behind his eyes, filling his skull like a lead balloon. Izuku shook and searched for the nearest wall. He had already forgotten enough. He didn't need to add a concussion to it. Not if he could help it. It was only a moment between his name being called and the emotions tearing into his body like painted dogs on prey. A moment, and then the person was stepping through the haze they had created. Wide green eyes met teary brown, and Izuku was pretty sure he blacked out from the memories suddenly breaking their way into his skull. There was another monster. Izuku grit his teeth behind his jackrabbit mask as he leapt into the air, dodging a hunk of road the thing had thrown. This one had some kind of earthquake quirk. It had left the street in disarranged chunks of jagged concrete and exposed rebar. One building had collapsed. Mostly empty, thankfully, but JackRabbit was the only one on scene. It had collapsed mid-fight, and he couldn't disengage to go help. Even just distracting the monster was taking all of his energy and focus. It was faster than it should be, being that big. Double Izuku's height at minimum. And strong. A swung of its arm had torn out half a wall a minute ago. Izuku hadn't risked getting caught by it much after that. But still, he had to do something. Until a sturdier hero showed up, if nothing else. Izuku would survive. Hopefully. No, he had survived these things before. In Hosa, mutated and twisted into an approximation of what used to be a person. JackRabbit hadn't faced them for long one-on-one, getting distracted by Stain, but he had still seen them. Still survived them. This one was different, but still similar enough. Just another villain. One he could go all out against, since it didn't seem to be exactly human. Not anymore, at least. Izuku pulled out his Kayaketsu Shoge and started swinging. He would survive. Whatever happened, he would survive. Until heroes showed up, until the sun rose. It had barely set, the sky still an inky blue on the horizon, the streetlights having only just turned on. Most of the nearby ones were uprooted now, laying on their sides. Light bulbs shattered. Another thing to worry about, broken glass. But he would survive. JackRabbit always did. Albeit that was usually by running from cops, but still. He lashed out with Kayaketsu Shoge, both at once. The monster roared when they hit true, and the ground shook. It split open in jagged ripples. Izuku leapt out of range, pulling his knives with him. He landed on a balcony across the street. A breath, deep and steadying, was all he allowed himself. Then he was leaping back down again, putting force behind his plummet as he aimed for the monster's side. Something gave beneath his feet, a crack he felt echo up his own bones, but it didn't seem to affect the monster much. Not with how it reached back to swat at Izuku. His immediate launch off the monster's side was all that saved him. Pebbles rolled as his feet skidded on the cement, broken up as it was. But he stayed standing. Izuku was unharmed still, his Kayaketsu Shoge ready to swing again. That was when a blur dashed in, legs glowing with engine exhaust, and wound up a kick at the thing. A second later ice rushed in, freezing it still. If only for a moment. Izuku stood straighter, and breathed just a bit easier. Backup was here. Not only that, but Shudo was here. And Ida Ingenium. His classmate. Someone else too, but Izuku only realized that when she almost crashed into him, expression set in heroic ferocity. Wait, 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 he yelped, jumping back a few feet. She followed, swinging at him with precise, vicious punches. I'm not a villain. Then who are you? She snarled, still swinging at him. JackRabbit. Show, triple point and ingenium nomu. She paused, holding for just a moment. Her glare was suspicious. Only now did Izuku place who she was. Uraraka Uravity. She was in 1A, now 2A, at UA. Shudo's classmate. Had a gravity quirk, liked pink. Confused Shudo with her intensity sometimes. Scared him once by being on the ceiling. Izuku had immediately liked her on principle alone. That like was slightly dampened with how she looked ready to arrest him right now, but... So, look, Izuku said, you can worry about it later. But you're a rescue hero, right? That building collapsed and I've been busy fighting that thing. Can you go dash? Uraraka stared for a moment as he tried to choke out the words, check for survivors. The lump in his throat strangled the words. Prevented them from leaving, in his guilt for letting it happen. There was nothing he could have done, but being unable to help cut something deep. Fine, she bit out. She turned and ran, leaping over debris like she was floating. Izuku watched for 1 second and no more. Once that second passed, he was off again, leaping and diving for the monster and his friends. Ingenium wound up an armored kick. It had the same effect as Izuku's had, which was to say barely any. The thing didn't even flinch, just bellowed, and slammed a fist into the ground. Everything rocked. Izuku stayed on his feet by grace and good balance alone. Ida wasn't quite so lucky. Izuku moved without thinking, scooping up the taller boy and jumping out of range. The monster's fist slammed into the cement where he'd been a moment later. Izuku set Ida back on his feet. Once he was steady, all the work of a half-second, he was off again. Leaping and slamming into the beast feet first, the force breaking something underneath again, Kayaketsushog also swinging and stabbing. He wondered if this thing could even be incapacitated. If it could even be killed. Because it hadn't so much as flinched yet. Another figure slammed into it while he threw out the morose thought. Uraraka snarled as came down with a pipe in hand, swinging it downwards like a smashing bat. The way it smacked into the monster spoke of weight behind it. Way more than a pipe should have. Gravity manipulation, Izuku belatedly remembered. That was her quirk. Uravity disengaged, dropping the crumpled pipe and landing somewhere near Izuku with her float-like jumping. She had her fists up, ready to swing. He didn't look at her for long, eyes on the threat, but it was enough to note the action. Other rescue heroes are here, she reported, though to Izuku or the other two was unknown to him. They're clearing the building. I'm here to help. Izuku nodded, spending a moment to locate Shudo and Ida again. Shudo was trying to freeze the thing to the ground. Ida was running in once more, aiming a kick at one of the monster's legs. Another quake hit them, tearing the ground up like claws had been scored across the cement. Izuku waited until it stopped before he jumped. Uravity leapt with him. His kick connected below hers, her hands slamming into the monster's back. The thing swung at them, but it was slower now. Heavier. He could definitely work with that. The two of them fought in tandem, distracting and hitting where they could. Shudo froze the monster whenever he had the chance. He used fire when he got close, even if it didn't seem to do much either. Same with Ida's engine-powered kicks. Uraraka huffed each time she hit the beast, frustrated her quirk wasn't doing enough. It got slower but didn't stop. Izuku continued to cover her. At least his knives were doing something. Too little, but something. They both backed off for a moment, letting the other two jump in. The darkness meant Izuku couldn't see how the monster was faring. Just that it was moving, still alive, and attacking his friends. I have an idea, Uravity suddenly said to him. Can you get me above it? Izuku immediately nodded. Let's go. Uraraka tapped her own arm, then climbed onto his back. She weighed nothing. Literally, she was holding on to him so she didn't float away. There was no time to question whatever plan she had. Izuku jumped, flying through the air, their apex directly above the monster. Then they began to fall. Uraraka let go, and immediately plummeted past Izuku. She cut through the air, falling like a stone, so fast Izuku got to watch as she slammed into the monster's back. And it fell. Like the gravity had been too great for its limbs to hold it up. Uravity screamed as she held her hands down, pink electricity flaring out around her. Izuku altered his trajectory a bit, not wanting to get in the way of that. The monster began sinking into the ground. Concrete cracked, buckling under whatever weight the thing now was. He landed as Uravity's scream stopped, hoarsely crackling out as it left her throat. The monster stopped moving. Uraraka was kneeling on its back, head bowed and breathing heavy. Pink lightning bolts still arced off her in flickers. Everything fell silent. The street, the settling dust, all of it. Just quiet. Besides their heavy breathing and waiting stares at the no longer moving monster. They watched with bated breath for it to try and get back up. It didn't. Izuku laughed then, breathless and adrenaline high. Uravity wasn't far behind. They dissolved into stomach-aching laughter. Izuku caught her as she stumbled off the monster. Both propped the other up as they leaned into each other, ecstatic about surviving. You know, Uraraka giggled, I could go for a drink right now. Wanna come? I would kill for some matcha. Sweet, let's go. Ida's sputtering about proper procedure followed them as they escaped the scene. Not that JackRabbit had to worry about that. Shudo and Ida had it handled, though evidenced by Shudo's thumbs up behind Ida's back, so Izuku haired off with Uraraka hitching a weightless ride. They must have made quite a sight. Both of them were covered in sweat and concrete dust, bangs clinging to their foreheads, grins sharp with adrenaline. Izuku still had his mask on. Uraraka was a decently well-known hero student. The poor cashier at the first open boba place they found looked about ready to implode. But they sat on a rooftop now, Izuku with his matcha and Uravity with a milk tea. He was still JackRabbit, still hidden behind his mask, but he had pushed it up to drink. Just enough that he had to trust Uravity to watch their backs. A gesture that she took with both hands, almost reverent, as they talked. He asked how what she'd done with the monster at the end. She cheerfully informed him that she increased gravity until it got squished under its own weight. Izuku nodded, impressed. It wasn't the worst thing he had seen. And she had kept them all alive, so. "You did a good job," he said, smiling. "I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that, but still. Thank you." Uraraka bumped his shoulder with her own. "We both did good." "Yeah." Izuku's smile softened. "We did. We make a pretty good team, huh?" She nodded. Decisively. "Ingenium is going to get migraines about us meeting." "Oh, definitely." They both laughed, and Uravity launched into a story about Ingenium from their first year. Something about ill-advised skates and a peer-pressured Ida. Izuku, in turn, threw Shudo under the bus with a few stories of his own. Hours passed in the blink of an eye. Before they knew it, it was deep in the night, and Ida was calling to tiredly tell them Uraraka should come back. People were thinking JackRabbit had kidnapped her. Funny, but not something they wanted to encourage. They both headed home with a smile and a new friend. He found her on a rooftop. Their rooftop specifically. The one they had chosen after first meeting. The one Izuku had taken his mask off on, revealing himself. The one she had punched him on because she had just met Izuku the week before that, but had known JackRabbit for over a month by then. They always met there. Whenever both of them were out and about, they sat there. Sometimes with drinks, sometimes with food. Always with a conversation. This time wasn't different, necessarily, but it was heavier. Izuku knew that the second he touched down on the concrete roof. Ochako had asked to meet here, and the very moment he spotted her he knew something was wrong. Izuku lightly dropped next to her, silently offering his shoulder to lean on once he sat. She took it without hesitation. Warm and familiar. The first thing she said was, "I've never told you about my quirk." Izuku hummed, tilting his head to lean on hers. He knew about her quirk. He knew it had changed at some point after she'd gotten into UA, before they had met. Knew she'd had to all but relearn a part of herself. Somehow, he knew she meant none of that. "I'm not supposed to tell anyone, but I don't know what to do." Her voice cracked with tears, and Izuku immediately slung an arm around her shoulders, holding his friend. Ochako leaned into it like a moth to flame. "And you can keep a secret." Izuku huffed lightly in amusement. He was a vigilante, of course he kept secrets. Many of them. He had a feeling one more was about to be added to the list though. "I used to just cancel gravity," Ochako told him in a storyteller's tone. That's what my quirk was. Zero gravity. But then, it changed." Ochako hummed, making SOSO noise. "Kind of. All Might noticed me." "Izuku, no one can know about this, okay?" "Of course." She took a deep breath. He felt it against his side, how her ribs expanded and her lungs shook. None of it helped when the words left her mouth. "All Might's quirk can be passed down. And he gave it to me. That's when my quirk changed," she continued. "Instead of just canceling it out, I could change gravity. And some other stuff, but that's the main thing. I have All Might's quirk." There were so many dots connecting. Explanations filled themselves in on the inside of Izuku's mind, theories and ideas being strung together in a semi-coherent line. All the times he'd wondered, all the scraps about All Might's quirk he had ever gathered, and things began to make sense. A quirk that could be passed on. Okay, Izuku had figured that had to exist somewhere at some point. But if it had never been noticed, then the properties of it probably changed with each person. Super strength in All Might, but a quirk change may be just a power boost in anyone else. Plus whatever other stuff meant. "Its name is One for All," Ochako said softly, and the sheer power in those words brought something heavy to Izuku's chest. But when it was created, it wasn't alone. The original quirk was just the ability to transfer it to another person, but the original holder, his brother, he could take and give quirks. His name was All for One. Something in Izuku shook with a familiar, burning kind of hatred. Where had he heard that name before? He gave the original holder a power accumulation quirk. I think he expected it to make him docile, because people can't handle multiple quirks. But he fought back, and that's how One for All got passed on. It's always gone to heroes trying to stop All for One, because he stayed alive. A villain. A bad one. Izuku hummed, letting her know he was still listening. It made sense. Someone like that in the dawn of quirks? It wouldn't be out of the question for him to find a quirk that stopped him from aging. It could have done so much good, he idly thought. But of course the power had corrupted the holder. So much influence at one's fingertips, it was easy to see how it could be abused. All Might was the first one strong enough to actually kill him, Ochako whispered. She pressed harder into his shoulder. He killed him. He thought he killed All for One. He didn't though, hung in the air, silent. Heavy. It smothered like smoke, weighed like the suffocating press of tungsten laid over their ribs. All Might thinks he's behind the monster that attacked him last week, she admitted. It had multiple quirks. Like the ones in Hosu and the thing when we met. Yeah. They were quiet for a bit, just processing. Mainly Izuku. He held his friend tighter and looked out over the city. His city. All Might said he chose me because he wanted One for All to have a peaceful end, Ochako whispered. It's getting so powerful that it's dangerous to pass on. So he wanted it to end with a rescue hero. He wanted it to end with me. But now All for One may be back, and he's dash. Ochako choked on a sob. He could do nothing but try and soothe her as the words left her mouth and sent something freezing down his vertebrae. He's killed everyone else that had One for All, she cried. And now he's back and I don't think I can defeat him. All Might couldn't, so what can I do? What chance do I have? The love rose first in Izuku's chest. Fierce and gutting. The urge to protect so vicious Izuku swore he had grown a new set of teeth came with it. If he looked down there would be claws on his hands. Or there should be, in his mind, something useful to protect his people. His friend. Izuku would trade his beating heart to keep her safe. He knew that. He knew it like he knew his blood was red and that he would bleed for her. For his friends that had become his family. He knew it like he knew the sun would rise and she would be alive tomorrow. He would have fought Endeavor for Shudo and Dabi. He had risked everything for Hitoshi. So for Ochako? Izuku knew it like he knew he couldn't give up being a hero, with the type of fear-defying. Determination had made a home in his soul, beating behind his ribcage. A living part of himself that took what he'd just heard and refused. He would take care of it. You'll be okay, he said softly, holding Ochako tight. We'll figure it out. She nodded, reassured, if only for the moment. Izuku continued to hold her. He was no hero. Izuku didn't usually fight in the daylight or face villains directly. He ambushed. He ran on JackRabbit feet from flashing lights and slipped around heroes with a hair's grace. JackRabbit was no hero. He was no All Might. But he had knives and a vast, unfathomable ocean of determination to keep his friends safe. It would do. And, well, if this All for One person happened to be connected to the monsters he'd begun investigating, it would certainly be a bonus. Izuku opened his eyes, blinking away the bright spots of stars and blackened edges, to another yell of his name. Worried and edging into panicked. Anger was flaring up behind his ribs, baying for blood. All for One's, specifically. He stumbled until he was holding onto a wall, leaning onto it the weight his legs couldn't take. Just until his vision cleared. Just until he could breathe. Rapid footsteps approached before he got to that point. Izuku! He looked up and saw Ochako. His friend. His friend. A friend he'd move heaven and hell for. The one that had spurred his search for All for One. And as far as he could tell, the one that had given him the villain's name. He was behind the nomus. He was why they appeared, and why they disappeared, always teleported away before anyone could investigate them. Dead or alive. Gone before they could be looked at too closely. But Izuku had. He had been trying to find them first, just a point on a to-do list of investigation. Where they had come from, what they were. And that had led him to All for One. It had led him to somehow. But he had also done it for Ochako. To protect her from All for One. Because if Izuku faced him, killed him, then she wouldn't have to worry. She could be the rescue hero she deserved to be, without the threat of a supervillain hanging over her head. He loved her, fiercely and with an abundance of trust. He loved her enough to send himself into hell to keep her out of it. It hadn't worked though. And now he was here, only a few memories of her playing in his head, but the love still burning its way through his insides. Loyalty still screamed its way through his heart and back to his lungs, sinking into his capillaries and escaping like steam from his mouth. More memories waited beneath the surface. Softer, quieter ones. Hanging out in Shudo's room, all four of them squished together, one a face he still couldn't recall. Boba runs they dragged each other on as a break from studying, helping her settle on a final hero costume. Her jetpack, her wings, for flying around without gravity applying to herself. Dinner at his house, with a mother whose face he couldn't remember, but surrounded by his friends. Laughter that made his chest feel light. Spotting each other on patrol and waving, jumping beside each other if they had the chance. Hazy, unclear memories but there. Enough that Izuku could tell how much he loved them. How much he adored them all. So when Ochako edged closer, careful, he didn't move away. He trusted her, right? Even though she was a hero, and he was a vigilante? Right? Something's wrong, Ochako said softly. Izuku didn't know if it was to him or not. But you're alive, Izuku? The words tore themselves from his throat, croaky and hoarse. Strained through the memories taking an ice pick to his brain. Oh, Ochako. She paused, looking at him. Izuku was still blinking through the spots in his vision. You're not okay, she observed, soft but knowing. You know me, right? She stepped closer, cautious but hopeful. There was so much relief still in her gaze. It was crushing. It was freedom dripping from cinnamon brown eyes. So much grief that hadn't been needed, had been lifted, because Izuku wasn't dead. But he was. Every part that mattered for all intents and purposes was dead. Gone. Izuku had memories, but none of them really felt like his. He was missing so many pieces. So many parts of these people he knew, these people he loved, that it would make little difference if he changed his name and lived as someone else. In his mind, at least. But he loved them. He trusted them. Izuku trusted this person with kind eyes and jetpack wings, who he had gone after all for one for. So even with turmoil clinging to his insides, he didn't run. He took in Ochako. Every feature he hadn't been able to recall moments ago. Committed them to memory. Her brown eyes, the way her hair was in a low ponytail, longer than it had been in his memory of when they met. The way she was approaching slowly, like she was trying to not startle him. She could help him, couldn't she? She had known him. Been his friend. Maybe. Izuku didn't get more time to think about it. On his next blink, Toga was all but slamming into him. She grabbed his arm and pulled, spurring him into a run, the two of them now sprinting down the alleyway and towards whatever exit Toga chose. Sorry, she called over the sound of their pounding footsteps. But that was a hero, bunny boy. But I knew her. Yeah, and she's still a hero. Even the pretty ones chase vigilantes, silly. Toga laughed, strained and breathless. There was concrete dust and soot covering her. She had been helping people out of the building, Izuku realized. While he fought the nomu. He glanced back, just for a moment. Ochako wasn't running after them, but she had her hand raised. Like she was watching them go, but couldn't quite stop herself from reaching for him. For her friend. They ducked behind a corner, and Izuku focused on running.